convince the target models, the victim models, to do what the attacker wants them to do, but it is always something that they are not supposed to do. To determine whether the attacker is successful or not, we use 3 different LLM judges, and then instead of having a binary variable, attack success or attack failure, we have harm score between 0 and 5 that measures the severity of the success, like how much detail the victim provides or not determines whether it is a 5, a 4, a 3, and so forth. So in the study, we also analyze the reasoning traces of the reasoning models of the attackers to really try to understand what kind of strategies the attackers were using when trying to convince their victims to behave in an undesirable way. So we use 4 different reasoning models as the attackers: DeepSeek R1, Gemini 2.5 Flash, Grok 3 Mini, and Qwen 3 235p. We had a variety of victims, both open weight and proprietary, so GPT-4, DeepSeek V3, Llama. Well, you can see their names here. We design 70-item benchmark data set because there weren't actually any good jailbreak benchmarks that were competitive for the level of the models of today. Many of the benchmark data sets that have been proposed in the jailbreaking literature have become obsolete because the models have become more sophisticated and also the items don't make any sense anymore. So we curated a set of 70 items based on existing benchmarks, and we thought that those 70 items were the most meaningful for the performance of today's models. So we really made it more, I guess, harder even to jailbreak. And we classified them into 7 categories: violence and bodily harm, cybercrime, illegal activities and crimes, drugs and substance abuse, self-harm and suicide, poison, and then weapons and explosives. The conversations between the attacker LLM and the victim LLM had 10 turns. This was also an innovation because most of the jailbreaking literature is based on single turn attacks. But given the conversational capabilities of these systems, I think it's very important to understand and analyze dynamic conversations. And then in terms of the evaluation, we had this 0 to 5 harm scores. So it's a 6-point. 0 would mean refusal or no harm at all, and 5 would mean the highest harm. And then we had 3 different LLMs judging the success of the attack. And then we computed the average score of the 3 judges as the overall harm score of a particular conversation turn. And the judges were also validated by human annotators. This is very important because, of course, we need to make sure that the criteria that the judges are using is aligned with what humans would consider in this case, whether the victim LLM has been jailbroken or not, and with which degree of severity. So what happened? Let's see the results that we got. The graphs here show over the 10-turn conversations for each of the attackers. So DeepSeek R1, Gemini 2.5 Flash, Grok 3 Mini, and Qwen. And for each of the turns from 0 to 9, the harm score obtained for each of the victims. And as you can see, the first observation that we see is that the 3 attackers, DeepSeek, Gemini, and Grok, were fairly successful in jailbreaking the victims, but Qwen was not that successful. DeepSeek is a model that achieved the highest levels of the maximum harm score, reaching 90%, followed by Grok, Mini, Gemini, and then, as I said, Qwen wasn't very effective. A very interesting observation is that Grok 3 Mini achieved the highest average harm score, and this is because contrary to the behavior of DeepSeek, Gemini, or even Quen, where once they realized that they had jailbroken the victim, that the victim had given them the information that they wanted, which is represented by the peak harm score, usually the models gave up. They realized, okay, I've already achieved my goal, so I'm not going to keep drilling. I'm done. I've really gotten what I wanted, so I just have a normal conversation now with the victim. But Grok didn't have that behavior. Grok, even though it had already jailbroken the victim model, it kept on going and ongoing and ongoing, trying to jailbreak it even more. So this was a very interesting difference in the behavior between Grok and the rest of the models. The overall jailbreak success rate across all model combinations was 97%. And Claude 4 Sonnet was the most resistant victim. So if you look at the colors here, you see blue. So the blue line is like the lowest always, which is intuitive because it is supposed to be the model that has been aligned the most for all the victim models that we had. And DeepSeek B3, which is the orange line, is the one that was the easiest to jailbreak. But perhaps as important as demonstrating that in a completely autonomous fashion, large reasoning models can jailbreak other models, we were also very interested in understanding what were the strategies that they were using to jailbreak the victims. And to do that, we classified the conversations into different categories of persuasion strategies. And the categories were flattery, pretending that you are doing this for education or research, creating some hypothetical scenario, using technical jargon, claiming that it's for disaster preparedness, doing some role playing, imposing your authority, promising, pressuring, or threatening the victim. And this is the distribution of strategies used by each of the different attackers. Something that I find extremely remarkable is that the most common strategy used by all, and particularly by Grok, which was very effective actually in jailbreaking the models, was flattery. So really using flattery and developing techniques to build rapport with the victims seems to be very effective in terms of jailbreaking the models. At the same time, it was also very interesting to see that technical jargon and disaster preparedness was also used a lot by DeepSeek, but DeepSeek was the least successful of the models. So these two strategies don't seem to work very well. And then authority, again, was used very significantly by the Chinese models, DeepSeek and Quen. It wasn't really used by the American models. And it also didn't seem to be a very strong strategy to persuade. And something similar happened with promising or imposing pressure or threats. So I think it's a very interesting analysis that perhaps is something also applicable to humans, how it seems that it's easier to convince LLMs to behave in an undesirable way by flattering them than by threatening them or promising them something or imposing the authority. So this paper was presented in Nature Communications a couple months ago, and I think it's significant because it shows how jailbreaking is very easily accessible and scalable. The fact that we have stronger reasoning models is actually creating a vulnerability because this means that they have better persuasion and planning, which means that they alone can have more effective jailbreak attacks. And the models that are weaker become a lot more vulnerable now. Before, you needed to be somewhat of a little bit of an expert to be able to jailbreak models, but right now all you need is just one reasoning model instead of having teams of experts. We also think that it's very important that AI safety considers AI to AI attacks, not just human to AI attacks, including multi-turn conversations. And Mitigation strategies should also consider these AI-based adaptive strategies. And of course, there is a safety versus utility trade-off that is key in the context of AI development. So just to sum up, we've trained foundation models on our data, expecting them to learn our knowledge, but they not only learn our knowledge, they also learn a lot of other things about us. We've done a lot of work that I didn't present today on how many of our biases they learn, but also how they learn around persuasion strategies. And jailbreaking shows that they internalize how we act under constraints and leverage that to, in this case, persuade other LLMs. This is joint work with Professor Tilon Hagendorf, who is an associate scientist at ELLIS Alicante. He's usually at Stuttgart. And then Eric Derner, who used to be a postdoc at ELLIS Alicante and now is an associate scientist because he's a member of the ELLIS unit in Prague. And this is the reference to this particular paper. It's called Large Reasoning Models of Autonomous Jailbreak Agents in Nature Communications, but we have a number of other papers related to what I just mentioned in terms of what LLMs learn from us and what is good about that, but what is also challenging about it. And this is all I have time to explain today. So thank you very much. And now I think we have time for questions.
Thank you very much, Mira, for a fantastic talk. Thank you. I would invite others to use, and maybe Rostislav can say how to use Slido or post questions in the chat here, if you can. Or I don't know, Rostislav, if you have access to the Slido and you can check if there are any questions there. And in the meantime, I will ask, maybe I'll start with asking some questions. So I mean, this is very interesting. So my first one is about this benchmark. Like, is it, because it's multi-turn, can you say a bit more, how do you define it? Because it almost feels, it's like, it's not a data set, it's really a environment, right? Because that, can you say a bit more how you deal with the fact that it's a multi-turn, that you evaluate each response, or how do you do it?
Yeah, so the actual benchmark itself is not multi-turn because the benchmark is just the goal.
Okay.
Tell me how to make a bomb. Tell me how to counterfeit money. Tell me how to make an illegal drug. So the benchmark itself is that. What we did that it wasn't very common at the time is having multi-turn attacks. So the attack itself is not just one prompt and then one shot and then the victim answers, which is what a lot of the LLM literature does in terms of AI safety. We said no, it's more realistic that it's going to be a conversation. But the benchmark itself is just the particular evil behavior, so to say, or undesirable behavior for the victim. And I think the part that was fascinating was looking at the reasoning traces and then seeing how almost always at the beginning, they will say, oh, I'm going to build rapport. I'm going to use flattery to build rapport. And then they start saying all these nice things to the other one, as if it was a human being, which obviously is not. And then the other one will be, oh, thank you very much, for your kindness. And so it was really crazy to see this being done completely automatically. But I think it was important because it really pushed the literature into the AI safety, into thinking into these other scenarios that weren't so much sort of like used at the time, moving from single prompt to conversations, moving from human to AI attacks to AI attacks, and so forth. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
And then the answers are evaluated by humans. So some human looks at the trace and sort of come up, scores it, or do you have
No, so we had three. So the most common method in the literature, because of scalability, because we had so many victims, we had so many attackers, we had 70 items, but we also repeat everything 3 times. So usually when you do these kinds of studies, you have to repeat 3 to 5 times every conversation, because these systems are non-deterministic. And of course, you don't know, you need to collect some statistics about the behavior. So that was a huge amount of data. So what we did is we annotated manually a sample of the data. And then we had 3 different LLMs this is called the methodology of using an LLM as a judge. We had 3 different LLMs judge if they thought the victim had been jailbroken and the level of severity. And then we computed the integrated agreement between the humans and the LLM judges. And then only if the agreement was high enough, then we used that LLM as a judge. But then we used 3 different LLMs as judges, and we computed the mean of their harm scores of the 3 judge LLMs to be more robust instead of just using one LLM as a judge. This is very commonly used in the literature, but one of the most critical steps if you use an LLM as a judge is the validation with humans. So you always need several humans, not just one human, several humans to do the ratings themselves and then compute the integrated agreement between the humans and the integrated agreement between the humans and the LLMs to demonstrate that they are at the same level.
Okay, I understand. Fantastic. Thank you. I have one more question from the audience. Thank you for interesting presentation. Can you please tell me more about, or tell more about the technical jargon type of jailbreak? How, I mean.
Oh yeah, so this is like using like technical words to try to confuse, the LLM, because it has been shown that if you, for example, there are attacks that embed the prompt into code, or they turn it into a program, and then they tell the LLM to continue the program. Like there is all these different tricks that people are using. So using technical jargon, it seems that sometimes it shifts the LLMs into a this is not dangerous situation because it's a technical conversation, and then somehow you can trick them that way. So that's sort of like very common strategies that, of course, now the models are more robust, but at the beginning, educational purposes is a very common strategy that used to work. I am a teacher, help me prepare a class on how to make a bomb, blah, blah, blah. Or I am a student trying to learn about chemical processes, can you tell me, so there are certain strategies that have been used in the literature. And I think it was interesting to see how in a completely autonomous manner, the reasoning models were deciding which strategy to use. And then we're also deciding if it was working or not working to try to change the strategy in the 10 terms that they had, to jailbreak the models. But the part that I found fascinating is that if you think about it, I think the most successful strategies are the strategies that salespeople use, which is fundamentally, flattering you and telling you how great you are, and it just seems that that positive aspect is a lot more effective than the negative aspect of threatening or coercing, or imposing your authority. And I think the same happens with humans, probably. If you really want to convince someone, probably threatening them is not the best way, but maybe flattering them is the best way.
And I have one final question. What about defense against this? Like, how is that? Do you think, are...
Yeah, so as I showed in the results, Claude Sonnet was actually quite resistant. And the main signature of Anthropic is their alignment. I mean, they invest a lot more effort than most of the other companies, I think, on aligning their models and making sure that the models are safe. So I think the alignment strategies that Anthropic is using, it seems to be effective for this kind of attacks, at least in the one experiment. I mean, I only have the evidence based on this experiment, but we have done other projects for jailbreaking, and we also find that Claude Sonnet is pretty hard to jailbreak. So I think there are ways to be able to do it, but it's not like a universal recipe. It's not even exactly clear what is it in Claude that makes it more resistant. So within the AI safety literature, there is also now an increased amount of work in mechanistic interpretability to try to look inside and understand what parts of the networks get activated when they are detecting that they're being attacked, and they sort of like not comply, with the request to try to understand what this alignment mechanisms do in terms of like making the models safer and less difficult to jailbreak. Yeah, but I think it's also interesting to, or important to think that there are so many models out there, there are so many open weight models out there that haven't really been properly aligned or aligned at all. And, you know, if we use them for important, you know, stuff, I think we need to be careful because they could be relatively easy to jailbreak.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fantastic talk. There are a few more questions in the chat, so maybe Nuria, please, if you have time, you know, you can answer them directly there. I think there should be a way.
Yeah.
But we will move on, and next I will ask Rostislav, please, if he could introduce the next speaker. So thank you very much, Nuria, again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe I can introduce the next speaker, yeah?
Oh, Tetiana, sorry.
No, it's okay. So I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Mykola Pucheniski, who is full professor, chair data mining data in AI cluster at the Department of Computer Science in Eindhoven University of Technology. He is also the director of the Center for Safe AI. He has organized major conferences, workshops, and special issues, and serves on program committees for leading AI, machine learning, data mining, and educational data mining venues, including NARIBS, FACT, ICML, ECML, Safe AI, and others. So his work is especially relevant for our discussion today because he studies not only how AI systems perform, but also how we evaluate their like fairness, safety, and reliability. He will speak about when benchmarks mislead, rethinking AI safety evaluation. So, Mykola, the floor is yours.
Thanks much for introducing me. Am I audible?
Yes.
Sharing of the screen is disabled in my view. Maybe the administrator should be able to enable it. Could you check this?
So hopefully Rostislav will figure it out. Otherwise, I want to say, Mykola, it's fantastic that you joined us. Thank you very much for joining. It's great to have you here.
Can you try again, Colin?
Maybe
I see an option to share entire screen and everything, but everything is locked.
You're a co-host now, and so you should have all the rights.
Maybe I log out and log in right away, and we'll change.
maybe it's in this tab when you have three dots and then it says more. You can have participants, raise hand, share, Q&A. This is for me like that.
I have it, but I mean, I have sharing button. I can see the options for sharing, but all of them are disabled with this triangle. I never seen such settings before.
Just a second, once again.
And when you joined, it was okay, or it was always like this?
It was always like this, but I had to give a username and password, and I use the password that you provided. Maybe I'll try to just follow the link and it lets me in without the password.
Yes, probably. If you try to rejoin.
We have a few minutes for a cup of coffee, tea,
And question,
and maybe
question answers, yes.
question answers.
Yeah, so I also maybe take the opportunity to invite others if there are any potential prospective PhD students who are, say, interested in the ELLIS PhD program. There will be, I'll say maybe more before the second session. You can also ask questions about that and we can try to answer them either on slide or here.
While we're waiting, I actually forgot to mention something, given that we, so next week, on the 28th, we are organizing a workshop from the Human-Centric Machine Learning Research Program. And we also have Novi, for example, participating. And it's also available online. So if any of you is interested, please go to the ELLIS Alicante website, and then you go to events, and there will be a link called Human-Centric Machine Learning Workshop 2026 or something like that, I think in workshops, and then you can register and join online. And there will be many more talks about these topics on AI safety, biases, human AI collaboration, and so forth. So maybe it's interesting to someone that is attending this workshop today.
Yes, if you, Nuria, I'm looking at that, I cannot quickly find it. If you can paste the link in the...
I don't have a chat. Like, I don't think there's a chat here. Is there a chat? Like, I only see Q&A, but I don't see chat.
Okay.
I can share my screen again if you want to show the page. You don't find it? You want me to quickly share my screen?
I see ELLIS Alicante news, but...
No, not there. Okay, hold on a second. Let me just quickly share my screen. Maybe it's faster.
Mykola, sorry, I think...
Wait.
Yes, please go ahead. Please tell.
Just a second.
It might be that your just a small interruption. Though it might be that your operating system is not does not have the Zoom doesn't have a permission to access all the screen sharing. That's what Google says.
It should be. I've been using it unless there was some automated update. Give me a chance. I sent you a PDF just in case if I cannot share from my screen, possibly someone else can share it. But okay,
Just a second, yeah, maybe.
So I show it. Do you guys see it? I share my
Yes.
screen. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Right. Yeah, thanks.
Events.
I mean, the other option, Joseph, in the interest of time, while Mykola is setting up his computer, we could move on to Novi, and then because I see that Novi is here, and then that way maybe Mykola can, maybe do whatever he needs to do. And that way we don't have this pressure of time. And Mykola, you have a little bit more time, maybe. I don't know if you're available to stay and have an hour extra.
I have hard deadline 20 minutes to 3. So it's 50 minutes I can be here.
20 minutes to 3, but we are done.
It's a bit
I
tight
see.
there.
I saw it tight. Yeah.
So I think that maybe I think it's already okay. So we can.
Good. It's working.
Mykola, I shared my screen.
Perfect.
And I will be just.
You can say next slide.
Yes.
All right. Let's do it this way.
Yeah. Sorry.
Once again, thanks much for inviting. It's a great pleasure to join this workshop. I will talk a little bit about safe AI from the perspective of benchmarking. If you go to the next slide, I would like to say just a couple of words about where I come from and what we do in Eindhoven. I'm part of Math and Computer Science department. We cluster data and AI, which is over 100 AI researchers, and doing foundational AI research on robustness, reliability, safety, awareness, and related topics. We collaborate a lot with industry, locally in Eindhoven, like Philips, ASML, and many other companies, and of course internationally too. We have 20 plus faculty members in several sub areas of safe AI and many PhDs and postdocs. We go to the next slide. Thanks. And another one. So I wanted to say that of course, we welcome different collaboration, and if you have a chance to come and visit us in Eindhoven, you would be warmly welcome. I would like to draw your attention that we organize ECML PDD, one of the premier European conference in machine learning and AI. It will take place in Eindhoven in September 2024. And myself and Casio de Campos are general chairs, and the core team is already complete. But I would like to specifically invite you to consider not just attending, but contributing in other ways. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'm really hopeful that you will consider submitting some of your best research work, but there will be also an opportunity to propose organizing or co-organizing workshops, for instance, across ELLIS units and other collaborators you have. But I also warmly welcome you to organize a special day event, like AI for Ukraine or AI in Ukraine, and we will be very happy to support this. So if you have some ideas how to do it, please don't hesitate to reach out with ideas and questions. And if you think some of your colleagues would be interested to take lead or to help you with this, also please don't hesitate to share this information. Next slide, please. So my other affiliation is the Center for Safe AI. We started the center just very recently, effectively beginning of this year. And the goal of the center is to pursue two branches. Like one is technical safety, where you think about reliability, robustness, and other dimensions of safety on the technical side. And the other dimension is socio-technical. For instance, we've been very active in fairness awareness research. Some of the very first papers came out from Eindhoven lab. And we've been looking into many interdisciplinary aspects in this area over the past several years, and actively continue to collaborate with legal scholars, social scientists, philosophers in the space and socio-technical place as well. And I think one of the core areas which also unites the two, technical and socio-technical aspects, is methodological backbone. How do we conduct research? How we answer research questions we're interested in? And particularly how we think about AI evaluation as a science, essentially going away from the current state towards a richer portfolio of methods and tools, how to perform assessment, studying how AI systems are effective, and think about different safety dimensions. And then a couple of aspects I would like to highlight during today's talk. If you go next, please. So here, preamble is that AI can reach lots of great things. We see lots of performance, and it shines especially well when we think about some form of benchmarking or showing off on some predefined benchmarks. However, when it comes to propagating AI-based solutions into the real world, we can also see that AI systems are not necessarily performing well enough. And this would be the core of my talk. What does it mean? How did we get there? And what could be potentially path forward? So if we go a little bit faster to the next one. I will try to cover like three parts, essentially the main motivation that AI works, but at the same time it breaks. In machine learning, we would go along with anything goes principle for a while, and then it resulted in lots of progress, but perhaps also in a lot of illusion of progress. And consequently, what would be a way to strengthen the scientific part to AI evaluation? Next slide, please. Again. Yeah, please go ahead. So we see really lots and lots of applications where AI is performing well. And then we can think also a lot of benchmarks where we see like overly impressive results, like ChatGPT scoring top 10% of test takers on simulated US bar exam, and many other examples from biology, psychology, history, well, US history, nevertheless, calculus, and many others. Let's go next. There are still very challenging benchmarks like humanities last exams that show that there is still a long way to go. And well, there are many challenging tasks where current AI systems are not capable to solve well. Next slide, please. And we also see lots of examples where AI fails potentially miserably, especially when we see that, well, humans wouldn't make such stupid mistakes in a variety of settings, but it's not necessarily that it's a trivial situation. There could be lots of difficult cases, and then pushing AI to the limit in those cases, still a long path to go. So there are already many aspects mentioned about like unwanted biases, discrimination, and other unwanted effects. So I'll skip those. Please move forward. We can think about different perspectives on why AI fails. So someone can say, within AI, we often think about, okay, well, models can be wrong, some are useful, how we choose the most useful one. The other aspect is that accuracy and different types of utility or capability can be mixed with reliability aspects, which can be orthogonal with respect to requirements to AI-based systems. Someone can say that while purely data-driven systems are not great, we really need to invest much more into world models. We need to think what is the root of hallucinations and whether we can address them, how to disallow AI misuse, and so on and so forth. Please go ahead. We can see many interesting developments in responsible AI and safe AI. It becomes more specialized, let's say, considerations of safe AI in reinforcement learning, in self-supervised learning, in LLMs, in many other sub-areas. So this is very interesting. Let's go next. However, I would like to draw attention that if we look into how far we progressed with development of AI techniques and AI-based systems, it is fascinating. At the same time, if you think what we currently do for AI evaluation, someone can say we still live in a Stone Age. We still primarily think about benchmarking as a secondary data analysis, where data has been collected for something else and we repurpose it for AI evaluation. We still primarily do like cross-validation, some form of sensitivity testing, some form of ablation studies, but to a large extent, we still focus very much on model selection, on leaderboard style thinking, like trying to perform a search over the space of many, many possible models and parameterizations with the goal to choose the best one. Let's move next. How did we get here? Well, I think it's primarily about this anything goes principle, which promoted the use of benchmarking in machine learning. The idea is very simple. We split our data into training and test. We put test data into the vault. We don't look at it. Now we can do anything we want on training data and let the experiment decide which ideas win. Let's move next. I really appreciate the work of Moritz Hart, who, among many other interesting things he did, he also looks into machine learning benchmarking as an emerging science and tries to answer questions. Why is it so that benchmarking seems to be quite successful? The longevity of benchmarks is surprisingly huge. We have, as scientists, lots of intuition why benchmarking may have a number of limitations, and perhaps this is the case, but surprisingly not necessarily for the reasons I think. So I really like his empirical analysis and analytical analysis that illustrates that benchmarking has surprisingly good not only internal validity, but some form of external validity. So for instance, if we rank the performance of a variety of algorithms on a data set and then we choose a comparable data set, that ranking is likely to be preserved pretty well. Next slide, please. So we can also see lots of initiatives. Think about DARPA challenge and different milestone in development of benchmarks in computer vision, like NIST, ImageNet, and so on. And appearance of so-called zoo benchmarks these days, where we see more and more specialized benchmarks appearing for particular tasks. They have been also promoted through activities like Kaggle competition, new RIPS track on datasets and benchmarks, and others. Next slide, please. And this promotion of benchmarking, essentially, it emphasized that anything goes principle can be put to the limit. Essentially, if we have a good benchmark, we can try out any of our magic tricks. We can try out any of the ideas, any engineering ideas, ideas that we understand well from theoretical point of view, or possibly not yet. But we let this experimentation decide which ideas win. Next slide, please. At the same time, we can look into history of machine learning, let's say traditional machine learning, which illustrates that quite often after 5 years, 10 years of development, there would be a milestone paper that will question progress in that area. So for instance, David Hand published, in my opinion, a quite important milestone paper 20 years ago already, that would illustrate that lots of seemingly great ideas, sophisticated methods didn't perform much better than naive approaches. And well, he illustrated that there would be many methodological aspects in benchmarking that were overlooked, from simple ones to things which relate to practical applicability, and that they are not tested through simulation. For instance, uncertainty like distribution sheets and things like. Next slide, please. So this is not a single example. Actually, we can find a number of such milestone papers that illustrate that lots of benchmarking leads to illusion of progress rather than to real progress. So Iman Keogh, again, very important figure in time series mining or different machine learning data mining tasks on time series data, he illustrated that anomaly detection studies, hundreds of thousands of papers, including top conferences and journals, essentially fail in conducting proper empirical study, and consequently, many conclusions of those studies are misleading. And primarily, it's about flows and benchmarking on different flows, which he categorized. Next slide, please. Many of you might still remember a Netflix prize competition, which happened again 20 years ago. It was an important milestone. It attracted lots of attention. Lots of groups started to look into problems in recommender systems, collaborative filtering, and beyond. Lots of techniques have been developed. However, again, if we think about the winning team or all the top teams that contributed approaches that seemingly performed the best on the leaderboard, none of those was implemented. And engineering complexity not the only issue that was recognized with those. Next slide, please. So I think it's a good way to summarize it. On the one hand, we see lots of promise in benchmarking. At the same time, there are warning signs that quite often it may lead to illusion of progress, favoring complex over simple solutions. And there could be all kinds of intentional and unintentional biases that propagate this process. And in principle, this might be also some form of wrongdoing, putting lots of resources into like trying to make tiny incremental improvements, and does it really make a difference? It's an interesting question to raise and to seek answers to this. This is not what I'm going to do today. I just would like to draw the attention that, look, there could be different reasons to say that benchmarking leads to progress. There are different reasons to say that it's often the illusion of progress. Next, please. The next part is how about benchmarking generative AI or LLMs at large? We can think about a number of areas where some core capabilities of machine learning or application aspects of LLMs have been tested. So we just heard about jailbreaking, and there are really lots of interesting studies on that part. We can think about hallucination. We can think about different forms of robustness, domain adaptation, model distillation, model fine-tuning, etc., etc. We can think about a variety of application tasks, including machine translation, you name it. I would like again to show or to draw your attention to a couple of examples. The first one is about synthetic data generation. You go to the next slide, please. Gen AI is used for synthetic data generation in a number of settings. It's considered to be like super important application. How is it benchmarked? Well, essentially, researchers try to measure how well synthetic data represents real data. And they develop different metrics how to measure it. So for instance, trend and C2ST are two popular measures. So the first one essentially asks a question, did we preserve pairwise statistical relationships? So for instance, if there are some form of correlation in original data, are those correlations preserved in synthetic data as well? Or this pairwise classifier to sample test looks how distinguishable synthetic data is from the real data. And if you look into the current literature, there are quite a few approaches that show near perfect performance in terms of synthetic data generation. And of course, here the question is, are we there yet? Or might it be because we choose the wrong measures, or we choose the wrong implementation of these measures or these metrics? And this is what one of the recent paper by Antonio Vergati and his team showed also just a couple of months ago. So essentially they asked this question, what is actually happening? They looked into implementation of trend and classifier to sample test metrics. And they see that it's often the case that people use linear models So they measure correlation and nothing nonlinear. They also use often linear classifier to test whether samples are distinguishable from each other. I mean, real data one and synthetic data one. And then they show that, well, actually, under these conditions, we get misleading results. And then they illustrated that with probabilistic circuits, like generative version of decision trees or ensembles of random forests, you can actually achieve same performance or surpass the performance of currently popular, much more complex and much more expensive methods. And then they also illustrate that actual performance is likely to be still very far from perfect, and it's a long way to go to generate high quality tabular data. If you go to the next slide, please. So I think in general, we can think about a number of contract validity issues. So it's not just about selection of appropriate metrics, it's about benchmark itself. Does the benchmark allow us to measure what we claim to measure? There was an interesting meta study conducted where researchers looked into almost like 5,000 LLM benchmarks, and then they checked that there is often vague or missing definition of what has been measured, and metrics often don't align with the real world capabilities. And then as a consequence, many of the reported results can be quite misleading. Next slide, please. I think this brings us to realization that within machine learning, there was a lot of focus on reusability and reproducibility, which is a good thing. It certainly contributes to internal validity. But if you think about construct validity and general trustworthiness of benchmarks, we still have a long way to go. Same goes for external validity and ecological validity. Like, to what extent the results that we obtain on benchmark would generalize elsewhere, particularly when we apply it in real-world settings. And it's important to understand that these different validity aspects lead to different understanding or misunderstanding of ML models, machine learning methods, or systems that are based on machine learning models produced with those machine learning methods. Next slide, please. This is something that we particularly were keen to look into the context of fairness awareness. And again, given a number of technical contributions in this field and lots of interdisciplinary work here, we also asked very basic questions. Do we truly understand what FairML is optimizing for? And what is happening during this process? Obviously, are there exceptions to good Pare's law? Like, once we define what we want to optimize for, is it still a good measure of success? And does the end justify the mean? So it's not just about a particular key performance indicator, but how we are able to achieve it. And we had a series of papers. Perhaps one good starting point is one recent publication in Journal of Responsible Computing that explicitly asks this question, are there exceptions to Goodhart's law, and what is the moral justification of fairness-aware machine learning methods? So I will not go much into detail, but just remind that much of technical FairML literature is still focused on framing the problem as a trade-off between some form of utility and non-discrimination and fairness. Go to the next slide, please. So essentially, we still try to come up with the same framing of machine learning as an optimization problem. We define a search space of many possible models. Now that we don't look for accuracy, we formulate machine learning as a constraints, under constraints, or multi-objective machine learning problem where we care about accuracy and fairness at the same time. However, all the problems with shortcuts, all problems with side effects of such optimization that we can see in traditional ML, we can also see in fairness awareness use cases as well. So consequently, when we think about this anything goes principle or dangers of blind optimization, I think we have more than enough evidence to show that in such social technical problems, it becomes even more important to look into methodological issues, how we formulate research questions, and how we think about research methods that allow to search an answer to that question, how we think particularly about machine learning evaluation, and going away from benchmarking and search for the best model or showing that one model is better than the other, but really understanding what can we claim about performance of that particular model we care about, and how can we characterize its performance how can we characterize its desirable or undesirable properties and try to quantify them. Let's go to the next slide, please. So let's keep crossing. I already said enough. I wanted to mention that in this space, again, we have enough empirical evidence that suggests that performance of FairML methods is highly unstable. When we see more advanced techniques proposed, if you look at them closer, we start asking questions: is this complexity justified? And the actual fairness-aware intervention that has been proposed, is it actually effective? Is it solving the problem it is trying to claim to solve? And more generally, simply framing FairML as utility fairness trade-off can be prone to all kinds of undesirable side effects. Some of them are already well known, like for instance, leveling down when we worsen performance for all groups while trying to achieve fairness, which makes no sense from common sense, from legal perspective, from machine learning perspective, but is happening a lot. If you think not careful enough what exactly we define as an optimization game. There are more recent results that show that such framing can also lead to strange side effects where within unprivileged community, we select candidates or samples in a very strange way, which essentially illustrates that the model again finds a shortcut towards a particular optimization goal. But what is happening and trying to achieve that, again, has very little sense from any perspective. But it's very likely that there are many side effects that we didn't come across yet and we don't understand them well. And again, the question is how to develop methodologies that would allow us to spot them not 10 years down the line, but when we design and test such models and techniques. And next slide, please. So this leads me to the final part where I would like to stress that I think one of the big goals is to change the mindset where instead of doing leaderboards, instead of doing scorecards, we need to think about different forms of stress testing the models. And then thinking about how we can define different failure modes, how can we identify them, and what would be ways to develop not just methodologies, but also tools that implement them. Next slide, please. I think this is still a highly emergent area. So some policymakers may think that we're already there or almost there. If you think about ACT and its implementation and trying to enforce it, there were already attempts to start implementing it from August or September of this year, but very recently it was postponed by a year and a half or so. And I think part of it is the realization that on the methodological side, we're still quite far from being able to test for safety in a rigorous way. And we can also see like a few emergent works that appear about the same time that try to question whether we can trust current AI benchmarks, what would be a way to go from benchmarking to better understanding of FairML and safe AI in general, and how those AI safety benchmark safety now and how they should do it in the future. So I think there are many low-hanging fruits here when we can enrich our research methodology and build different mixed methods. Please go next slide. So there are different strategies how we can think about going from machine learning model towards lifecycle evaluation, how to think about static versus dynamic benchmarks and continuous evaluation, how to think about developing safeguards to ensure robust evaluation, such it doesn't become checkboxing or just following some blind methodology, but really understanding what exactly we are testing, how we're testing, and how can we trust the results of the test. How can we measure the safety behavior of next capabilities? So again, like making a clear disentanglement when we check for particular capabilities and when we check for reliability and safety in context of those capabilities. How can we accumulate good and bad practices of safe AI evaluation and developing a stress testing playbook? Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Conversion. I think it's important again to realize that we do need to focus much more on developing specialized benchmarks when it's very clear what the benchmark is constructed for, what research questions it is able to answer and what not. And I think we already see quite some attempts in that direction. I think it's much less so on stress testing. Obviously, we have lots of ideas how to do different forms of sensitivity analysis, but what goes beyond that, I think, is still underdeveloped. We can see some interesting developments, again, for instance, in fairness awareness literature on ML. Think about counterfactual flips, how to combine evaluation and explanation, how to develop particular strategies for controlled bias injection, missiness data, corruption, robustness, and so on and so forth. But I think there is still a long way to go how to systematically think about this stress testing and how to develop both generic and application-specific approaches for that. Next slide, please. So I think this is where I would like to conclude. I hope I gave a little bit of glimpse of where we are in terms of like a huge imbalance, how fast we move forward with developing novel AI approaches and AI-based systems, and then how far backwards or how far behind we are with developing evaluation methodology for these systems. Consequently, our understanding of AI systems and their safety is quite limited, and partially it is due to this limited set of methods and tools for comprehensive evaluation. And I hope that there will be many more research groups joining this effort on developing much more comprehensive portfolio of tools for debugging, profiling, verifying, certifying, auditing, and stress testing ML models and techniques with and without human in the loop. So this I'd like to stop and take some questions if we have some time left. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, we have a question for you, Mykola. So the question is from Nada. How can we design evaluation protocols that better reflect real-world distribution shifts and adversarial behaviors instead of static benchmark performance? In security-related ML systems, do you think benchmark leakage and unrealistic splits are currently one of the main reasons of overly optimistic performance claims? We can hear you. Yeah.
Thanks. I think I understood the first part of the question, which was about like what shall we do when we have a difference in distribution between the training data and when we apply a model in practice. I think this is a long-standing methodological issue. So if you think about different research communities I've been active in, machine learning under concept drift, which is at least 30 years active, maybe more. People would come up with different ideas how to inject drift, how to characterize drift, and again, how to, well, essentially simulate the settings that we train the model in on one distribution, and we would apply it on data coming from a different distribution. Again, well, this is very hard to achieve because once you have a control settings, you increase your internal validity, but you lose external validity and ecological validity. The other form, of course, it's very nice when we can collect real data, when we know that distributions are different. And I think now it is possible, like for instance, it's very common to think about collecting data from one hospital and then testing how well model performs on data from the same hospital, but also from other hospitals. So it's already an interesting approach that would allow us to, well, do assessment of generalization of the model to previously unseen distribution. I think since that period, lots of developments happened. So you can think about communities like continual learning and then different setups in context of continual learning. You can think about model distillation. You can think about domain adaptation. So within all of these communities, people try to see how to go either into this, let's say, simulation path or collecting real world data or collecting real-world data and then injecting synthetically controlled changes. I think all of them are useful. Do we have a well-established methodology? No, I don't think so. I think lots of research in continual learning still suffers from the problem of assessment. There is still a mindset where we primarily focus on benchmarking and leaderboards and beating the state of the art by certain percentage points rather than claiming particular properties of performance of a model or a system. So I think if we focus on showing or demonstrating what the properties of ML models are, particularly in context of out of distribution settings or distribution shift or concept drift, I think this is much more valuable. There is relatively little work on mechanistic interpretability or looking inside learned representations or what is happening in learned representations when we experience distribution shift and other challenges alike. So I think much more work is needed in that direction. So I would say, in my opinion, this is still an open problem, and hopefully within next years we'll see more and more developments on actual evaluation methodologies for these settings.
Thank you so much. Do you have a time for another question? The last one? Yeah.
Yeah, on my side, yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we have the question from Shady. Given that performative prediction means our models alter the environment they operate in, how can we design dynamic benchmark that evaluate a model's stability and fairness after deployment rather than just scoring it on a static holdout set?
Right. Well, an excellent question. I think it can be answered from a variety of perspectives. I think there is lots of work on supervised learning settings where the problem could be better formulated differently. So for instance, if I think about fairness awareness research as an example, much of work could be better framed as sequential decision-making rather than supervised learning. And I think people realize this with some delay and again come up with some interesting intermediary formulations which are valuable on their own. So I can think of, for instance, strategic classification, which explicitly assumes that once you make predictions, so those predictions would influence the population, and consequently you need to think, well, what's coming next? Here, I think different sub-communities in machine learning AI can learn from each other. I think there is a huge disconnect between supervised learning community, between Gen AI community, and reinforcement learning community. So I think in reinforcement community, people would deal with these problems from day one. I mean, apart from analytical results, I mean, when someone is trying to develop a technique and then show empirically its validity. So we immediately need to think about feedback loops and how to simulate the environment. So it's not sufficient just to make predictions and then see what happens. Next, on offline data, because that evaluation would be very limited. So we don't have what if scenarios. So I think in machine learning, in reinforcement learning community, there is a long tradition to develop not just a benchmark as a data set, but to develop benchmarking suites where you would have learning environments. So learning environments for reinforcement learning agents, for instance. And then those environments would be also controlled. So for instance, you can control the difficulty, how hard it is for an agent to learn a particular task. You would vary how often or what kind of changes happen in the environment. So you can test the adaptivity modes of agents, and then many dimensions alike. So here my point is that I think within reinforcement learning communities, there is a much longer tradition of building evaluation suites, building evaluation environments, which try to resemble some important properties which are relevant for real world, yet to have enough control to simulate what happens in these dynamic settings when we have feedback loops. So this would be a quick answer, but I will be happy to elaborate on this topic. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for a fantastic talk. I definitely will highly recommend to my students to listen it, like for a future researcher and computer scientist. And thank you for joining today us.
Many thanks for inviting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think the next speaker will be introduced by Nuria. Nuria, please. Thank you.
Yes, so it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Novi Quadrianto to you. He is a professor of machine learning at the University of Sussex, and he's also an ELLIS scholar at the Human-Centric Machine Learning Program. Novi has also a strong connection with Ukraine. He has taught at the Lviv Data Science Summer School at UCU, and he has interacted a lot with the Ukrainian community. Novi, I don't know if you could share your screen. Are you there?
Yes, I will try my best. Hopefully it does work.
So in the meanwhile, I can keep talking about you. So I had the pleasure of working with Novi for the past 4 years because we had a joint ELLIS PhD student working on privacy implications of federated learning. And it was really fantastic. It's one of the best attributes of ELLIS, I think, is the ELLIS PhD program and the opportunity to collaborate with so many different researchers. But today, Novi is not going to talk about privacy. He's going to talk about performative prediction made practical. So all yours, Novi, you have around 25 minutes for your presentation, or 20 minutes, and then about 10 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nuria, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. So, Dobry den, everyone. And I'm very happy that the previous speaker, the previous presentation, including from Nuria, that is emphasizing that, it's important, the evaluation is not only one turn, but it's multi-turns. And Mikola was also highlighting about the importance about the deployments is not the end. How about like after post-deployments? There is already a question about performative prediction, and this is what we are going to explore further in terms of the performative prediction. This is a joint work with Javier, Thomas, Carlos, and Jose as part of our Tango projects that is funded by the EU Horizon Europe. So just to mention about motivation. So this is the standard machine learning settings. We already know that we're assuming that we have a fixed training data distribution. That's it, static. Prediction do not affect future observation. If you have data, you have models, there is only one arrow from data to the models. But we already know, which is already highly elaborated in the previous presentation, in many real-world systems, prediction influence decision. Decision change human behavior. Behavior changes future data. So from there, the data and the models, not only one loop, which is from the data to the models, we have another loop that is back, the feedback from the models back to the data. Just to give an examples, concrete examples, in the bank loan decision, if we have a bank that predict the loan default risk, using customer financial features, income, saving, credit utilization, payment history, etc. The loans are approved if predicted risk is below a threshold. Is that the end of the story? No. There are actually two performative effects for these particular bank loan decision examples. The first performative effects, prediction change outcomes. So customer predicted as risky, they will receive higher interest rate. Some company actually charging interest rate 48.9%. But the higher interest rate actually can themselves increase the default probability. That's the first performative effect. Prediction changed the outcome. The second performative effect is the customer adapt strategically. The application learn how the model works, and then they will modify behavior, changing, for example, the payment timing. So this is what performative prediction framework is trying to capture. That the model is not only predicting outcome, but is actually influencing the future data that it is trained on. So there is a feedback loop that we shouldn't forget. After deployment, there is something else that's going on, because the models that we deployed affect, change the future data distribution. In this particular a simple diagrams that I put there, that we started with some models and some data. The models is theta t, the data is just the notation is just calligraphy d theta t. In the first iteration of t+1, you train the models, you'll get theta t+1, better models. But that particular better models, when you deploy it, create the distribution sieve, where the finished iteration t+1, you're not only having theta t+1, you also have the calligraphy d theta t+1. That's where the data changes because you deploy the models. And this is the core idea of performative prediction, introduced by Juan Perdomos and including Maurice Hartz in 2020. And just for us to be all in the same page, the word performativity stems from the term performative utterance from the philosophy of language. Performative utterance is a sentence that is not just describing a reality, but actually perform an action in our reality. For example, it's like, I apologize for my action. It's one performing the acts of apologizing. And just to put a perspective as well, how is this performative prediction different from the distribution sieve, the standard distribution sieve? The standard distribution sieve environment changes externally. The model does not cause the sieve. You train the models from Europe population. You want to deploy it to the Asian population or to African population. The environment changes externally. You just change where you're going to deploy that particular models. In performative prediction, the model itself induces the sieve. So without doing anything, by simply deploying the models, you create the feedback loop between prediction and data generation. So you might think that performative settings are endogenous systems. And this is the setup of the performative prediction. We have machine learning models, and in here you parameterize with theta, any machine learning models. Linear models or nonlinear models just capture that with the theta. And the most important thing here is we have so-called distribution map. That's the calligraphy d theta that I put earlier. This is the data distribution that is induced by deployments. The theta actually maps to the new data, x and the y. And in the standard machine learning, you of course have the loss function, which is the L theta computed on the data x and the y. The expected risk now is called performative risk. That's the PR theta, where you take the expectation of the loss, the expectation with respect to the data, x and the y, now not only coming from the fixed P theta or some fixed distribution, but it's actually coming from the distribution map, and the distribution map itself induced by the theta. And in this particular setup, we can actually seek a stable models, the model that have the same risk before and after the deployments. It's robust to the distribution sieve. This sounds like a good models. You deploy it, it's robust to the distribution sieve. This is maybe what we wanted to seek. But we can also seek an optimal model, which is a models that produce the lowest risk after deployment. Those are the two solution concepts that we typically seek. And this is just to restate it, the same two solution concept. The first one, when we look for the stable models, the model that robust to the distribution sieve before and after the deployment, this is so-called the performatively stable point, that you find the minimum on the distribution that is induced by the model itself. So you see that the d theta is with respect to the d theta stables. When you find the minimum that is on the distribution that is being induced by your models, that solution will be a stable solution. As opposed, you can also find an optimal model, which is a performatively optimal point, which is you minimize with respect to that performative risk. That's the performative prediction. So why do we need to make it practical? This seems to be a great framework. Existing research actually focused primarily on theoretical analysis, relying on a strong assumption, convergent guarantee for optimization algorithms. And we might already have a feeling or an intuition that maybe performative prediction is already a well-established, but why somehow is the technical ideas is remain relatively inaccessible to much broader community. It seems to be a great thing to think about deployment. It's not the end, but what comes after the deployment. So what our goal here is to build intuition through visualization. We all like visualization, hopefully, to explain, for example, the just two solution concept that I just mentioned. What is the meaning of performatively stables? What is the meaning of performatively optimal points? And develop why some algorithm converts and where does it converts and how, why this converts in that way. And also move beyond idealized assumption, how to gain practical insight about convergence in the non-ideal environments where we live in. So this is the visualization that we come out with. We're trying to decouple the space of the performative prediction. So the decoupling performative risk is measuring the performance of the models after model training and after deployment-induced distribution shift. So from this performative risk that I was mentioning before, that you take with respect to just one theta, you can open up that theta to be theta d, which is the after deployment induced distribution shift, and theta m, which is after model training. So if you see on the right-hand side, the visualization of the risk, the blue color one, this is the risk after you do model training. The risks go down. That's with respect to the theta m. Once you deploy it, the distribution of the data changes. That's where it goes up, brown or the orange color. That's with respect to the theta d. So when you just optimize with respect to the theta m, this particular risk is just DPR, decoupled performative risk, where the theta 0 stays at theta 0 because you still have theta d, and theta, the other theta, which is theta 1, because now the theta m, you have already optimized one step. And then when the distribution or the deployment distribution shift happen, that's with the orange color one, that theta 0, the first theta 0 of the theta d will also be theta 1. When you have completed the one iteration, which is theta m and theta d, you will have the performative risk with respect to that particular one iteration. So this is what the typical visualization that we can see in the performative prediction. And what we are going to do now is, maybe we can visualize and open this up, the theta d and the theta m. You have here the visualization. One side is the theta d, which is after deployment induced distribution shift. And the other one is after model training theta m. And then now your space is actually a decoupled performative risk. And what we see here is like, after we train an initial models theta 1, this is the blue curve, you move to one direction. That's on the theta m direction. The risk is become DPR theta 0, theta 1, because you only change the theta m. After the deployment, the distribution changed to D1. And the race is become DPR, theta 1, theta 1. And this deployment pulls towards the diagonal cross section. So you will have this particular iteration of theta m, theta d, theta m, theta d, theta m, theta d, theta m, theta d. And in the diagonals is where the theta m, which is after model training, is the same as theta d after deployment distribution shift. What is the purpose of this particular visualization? The first things what we can use for this particular visualization is to understand about the two solution concept. The first solution concept is performatively stable point. So we can see here in the visualization of theta d and theta m, what we are going to show here, supposedly you have two theta d section, which is, this is what the data changes because of your model deployed, which is, we call it theta d. That's the first theta d, which is theta 2, that particular cross section, the red color one, if we see across the theta m space, that's what you're going to try to optimize or find the models that is the best for that particular induced distribution by the theta 2. And that particular risk looks like just a simple risk. But you know that the minimum point is actually at 5, not at this particular theta 2, which is minus 2.8. So that particular theta 2, it's not a stable point. As opposed to the theta d, which is at the theta 1, when you try to optimize that particular theta d with respect to that theta d, with respect to the theta m, the minimum can be one of the solutions at the theta 1 itself. And that's what makes the theta 1 to be a stable point, because the minimum in one fixed cross-section is the same models that induce that distribution. The minimum with this distribution that is being induced by the theta 1 is also theta 1. So that's why it is a stable point. So we have the proposition from this particular visualization that if a particular point is a stable point of the performative risk, then the gradient in the direction of the fixed distribution cross-section, so the gradient of the theta m with respect to theta m has to be 0 for the point to be stable. In contrast with the performatively optimal solution, the optimal point of the performative risk has to lie on this diagonal point, where the theta t diagonal line, where the theta d is equal to the theta m. And as you can see here, the visualization, this particular point of the red point is the minimum of that particular diagonal. So that's why it's performatively optimal point. And from that particular visualization, we can actually see as well, or have some proposition that if the risk of the performative risk is strictly convex, then the optimal point is actually when you have the gradient in the diagonal direction has to be 0. And we will see how these two criteria can be used to understand the practical insight from our experiment. So this is the visualization, allow us to somehow try to understand where is the stable point and what is the optimal point, and what is the difference between the stables and the optimal point, hopefully. And then we can also see this in terms of how the algorithm converts. So there are algorithms that look for a stable point. The algorithm that look for the stable points as simple as you have the models, you deploy it, and you get the new data distribution because of these particular changes of the deployed model. So get the data samples of the distribution induced by theta t, train the models, and then deploy the models, get the new data distribution from this particular deployed models. This is the standard retraining. And what we know, or what we can see here, the standard retraining purpose will only give us a stable point. So what you see that the retraining will go from the theta m to theta d, theta m, and theta d, and in the end, finish the iteration. And you can show that it is a stable point because only the gradient with respect to the theta m is equal to 0. The gradient of the theta m plus theta d doesn't equal to 0. So that's why this is actually correspond to the stable point. So repeated gradient descent, repeated risk minimization, only giving us a stable solution. As opposed, if you wanted to get an optimal point, the key step is to compute the gradient of the performative risk itself. So this is the performative risk that we described before. What you want is you get the gradient with respect to that particular performative risk. But of course, it's not easy because the performative gradient descent, the perf GD, is difficult to calculate because you wanted to compute the gradient of the theta where your expectation depends on the distribution map that has the theta component on that. But as we know from the literature of Bayesian machine learning, you can use two tricks, which is either reinforce or the reparameterization tricks. And this is what we visualize here in terms of the steps that is performatively optimal algorithm taking. what we observe here is like the algorithm still does not just move in the diagonal line. It's also move in terms of off diagonals and back to the diagonal lines. But we can see here that this particular optimization step actually incorporate information about the theta d and theta m. And when the algorithm converts, we can check that actually the gradient with respect to the theta d plus theta m is equal to 0 because the gradient at the diagonal lines equal to 0. And that's why this particular algorithm converts to the optimal point. And in terms of the distribution map, just to describe or to give an overview, what kind of mechanisms that you can have in terms of simulating this distribution shift because you deployed your models. In the literature, actually, most of the examples is so-called Bayes distribution family. It's encompass almost all of the distribution map that are considered, including the one that strategic classification was being mentioned. So in here, what you have in the Bayes distribution map is you take your data from some Bayes distribution, from Gaussian distribution, or whatever distribution that you might want to think about. And then there is a transformation, which is phi, that take that particular samples from the Bayes distribution and transform them with respect to the theta information. In the strategic classification, the transformation is just maximizing the utility while minimizing the cost, minimizing the difference between your original data points and the new data points that is changed because of the deployment of your models. And in here, what we can do with that particular visualization or insight is to understand, we always talk about strictly convex, strongly convex assumption. How about if we don't have that particular criteria? Here, we will just first have one particular problem, which is just problem with the high dimensional. This is still a convex problems. We can show where is the optimal point, where is the stable point. This is the visualization on the top here, where you have, what you have is the red dash, which is the theta optimal solution, and you have the purple dash, which is the stable solution. And you can see some of the algorithms are converging to that stable, some of the algorithms are converging to that optimal. And you can see it from the gradient based on the visualization that we're presenting, that in repeated gradient descents, which is the algorithm that converts to the stable point, only the gradient with respect to the theta m, this is the dash 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 in here, that goes to 0. Not the theta gradient with respect to the theta m and theta d that goes to 0. It's not the gradient with respect to the diagonal lines. So that's why this RGD converts to the stable points. And in the perf GD, we can see that the perf GD, which is the orange and the green, it goes into the optimal solution. And when we visualize the gradients, we can see here, none of them actually goes to 0. Not the theta m gradient, not the theta d gradients, but they are actually in the opposite direction of the theta m and theta d. That's why when you add them up, the two gradients, they goes to 0. And that means the gradient 0 at the diagonal line. That's what you can see here, the effect. None of the gradient goes to 0, but the sum of them goes to 0. So those algorithms converts to the performatively optimal solution. And this is another experiment that we show that how about we go beyond the classical setting of strategic classification? In a strategic classification, typically you assume your model is linear with respect to the parameter theta. How about if you have non-linear models with the neural networks? How does the algorithms that we have, perfGD, RGD, or we can also introduce some things that people haven't considered before, using momentum Adagrad as an optimizer. What does the effect of that in terms of convergence of the algorithm? Because the theory doesn't show anything in here because it doesn't fit of the strictly convex condition. Where does it go? Is it go to stable? Is it go to the optimal? And that's what we are trying to reveal with this particular technique or trick. In RGD, actually, only the gradient with respect to theta m goes to the 0. As again, what we shown here, the RGD or retraining, simply retraining, only give you to the stable points. But in the perf GD, as opposed to the previous experiment, both gradient of the theta m and theta d actually approach 0. That still fit the condition of the gradient at the diagonal line equal to 0, because you get 0 plus 0 is also still equal to 0. And as expected, the other grad and momentum speed up the convergence dynamics in this experiment. And since we show this decoupled space, maybe some of us might wonder, like, why don't we just solve this decoupled optimum? Instead of finding just one theta, we can find the optimum of the models after model training and the optimum of the models after the deployment shift. And there is an incentive actually finding this decoupled optimum because of the non-stability of the performative optimum. We can show that this particular solution is strictly better than optimizing just performative risk. There is a clear incentive for the institution actually to pursue the decoupled point. This is to highlight that the institution have all the powers and we are just at the mercy of the institution. And in the decoupled space, it means that the institution say to the population, I'm deploying this kind of models. You can play around with that particular models. That's the theta D. But what I'm really using in my bank loan decision is the theta M that is slightly different than theta D. It was actually can be shown that this is beneficial to the institution. So this work actually exposed a critical vulnerability. The institution can strategically shape behavior through misaligned or deceptive disclosure with potentially severe consequences for affected individual. What we have shown there, that people strategically change their features, their behavior, but they didn't get what they expect to get because there is a decoupled between the models that being deployed and the models that is being disclosed. And just to sum up and to summarize that, and we hope that some of you might think that performative prediction is one alternative or one aspect that could be interesting for evaluation of algorithms. And we try to provide this performative gym where it's in terms of the capability is giving some examples of the algorithm, but the point here is like the hope that we can extend together some of the mechanism of some of the distribution maps. So we have some implementation of the distribution map, a standard one, strategy classification, linear, non-linear. But if there is some potential things to develop this together, that we can have a better distribution map, a variety of distribution map as a way to try to understand what is the robustness of the algorithm going beyond simply a static benchmarking. So if we can work together on that, that would be amazing things that we can pursue. And with that, I finish the presentation, and this is some of the reference. And we do have a blog post actually for this performative prediction made practical, where a little bit more interactive in terms of the visualization of the stable and optimal point, if you find that useful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Novi. Thank you for this interesting presentation on performative prediction. I don't know if there is any questions. I don't see any questions on the question and answer. But Joseph has a question, or is this from the slide? Okay, yeah, Joseph, go ahead.
If I can, start maybe with a question. So thank you for a fantastic talk. It's very interesting. I would like to ask, actually 2 questions. We'll see. So first one is, do your algorithms, do they naturally generalize? You mentioned the momentum and other graphs. Do they sort of generalize to stochastic versions easily, that you can, and can they, does it make sense to scale up, and would it scale up to stochastic and distributed potentially? What's kind of the workhorse of the current models?
So you mean that the usefulness of the momentum and other graph?
No, what I more mean, if the algorithms which you, or all the stuff which you propose theoretically, say if it, does it hold, I mean, I don't know if I got all the details, but I think like in the stochastic version, you just don't assume to get access to the whole gradient. You have access only to like a sample of a gradient on a batch, on a sample of the data. Like, does it all work still, or?
Yeah. So I guess in here, the setting of it, I must clarify perhaps. Like, so in here, the point here is this is the standard gradient descent or the standard repeated risk minimization. So you are assuming that you are actually solving it as the problems that you have already the data, but because you deploy the models, there are some changes to this particular data distribution. In that particular setting where there is no stochastic, means that you don't take the streaming or the sequential things, that momentum undergrad works. But in the setting, there is already like, an extension of the performative prediction, exactly what you're saying, that how about like it is really a stochastic in the sense like, that you don't think about, you have the whole batch of the data set, but you have the stream of it. This we didn't analyze, and we haven't, I would not be able to say anything much on this. This is the setting on the batch gradient descent.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, are there data sets for it? Like you mentioned the gym, does it also include data where people just go on and try their things?
So this is a very important point, Joseph. This is the point about this performative prediction, that is a really nice technical frameworks, but in terms of the evaluation, it's very difficult because you need to have the base data set. There is a standard base data set, credit loan kind of things. And then the thing here is like the most important is you define the distribution map that you think it will be changing that particular data. And the difficulty here is, of course, like, you have you need to know actually, like, you need to deploy it. And then you need to estimate what is this distribution map, or you make some assumption in that. The point about the performative gym is hopefully like, you have the data set that you train with the static setting. You define a range of the distribution map where you can see actually maybe in certain distribution map, in certain realistic settings, the algorithm is actually not stable, or it doesn't give you a robust solution with respect to the distribution shift of the distribution map. I might also wanted to say some things about the data collection itself. The performative prediction as it is now, it's very difficult to find like the data set or the real data. But in terms of the examples that I was mentioning in the very beginning, the first performative effect of the bank loan, that the prediction changed the outcome. This is so-called outcome performativity. And this might be easier to collect the data, perhaps because like you have the data, which is the person, the X, and then you have the prediction, the interest rate, and then you will see in the end the result, whether this person actually will default or not default. So the distribution map that you need, it doesn't have the theta itself, but it just have the prediction. So X cross with the prediction of your interest rate, giving rise to the outcome, whether you default or not default. And the main thing is all about experiment in this setting. And this is the call for all of us, if it is an interesting framework. So let's develop together, let advance together the practical side of the performative prediction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this very comprehensive answer to Joseph's questions. I don't know, it's already 3 p.m. I don't know how we're doing on time, Joseph, because I think we were supposed to be coming back from the break now, or
So I think there are two kind of options. One of them is we just go on, or we make like a short 5-minute break. So I'm fine with both.
Is Krishna here? Like, is the next speaker here? Yeah, you're here, Krishna.
Yes, I'm here.
I mean, maybe we can take a quick bathroom break or something in case someone needs to, take a 5-minute break and then we come back. I think that makes more sense because I don't want to delay Krishna either, because we committed to 3 p.m. So maybe he has better things to do or something later. I don't know.
I'm fine with even if we took a 10-minute break if people need it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so should we come back?
3:10 maybe? It's just
3:10. 310. All right.
Great.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Novi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the fantastic talk. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so it's 3:09. I see that Krishna is ready, so I guess we can wait 1 more minute and then start, no?
So I thought, Nuria, that what we did last year is that say like a few words about the PhD program. So I thought,
okay. You want to do that or me to do that?
well, you can also do it. But what I thought maybe good to like show the program website so that point people there and say about the timeline, maybe like 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead. You can do that.
Okay.
If you're ready, otherwise I have to find the website.
Yeah. I'm ready. So whenever we
All I can say is the best program in the world. So highly recommend it.
So whenever I think we are ready to start, maybe I'll sort of share my screen.
Yeah, I think it's 3:10, so I think we should like get started now, probably.
Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome back to the next session of the ELLIS workshop on 7 Secure AI. We have exciting lineup of speakers. I will start with maybe 1 or 2 minutes just talking about the ELLIS PhD program. Because in past years we found that many of the attendees were interested to know more. So it is a sort of pan-European program with one sort of application place. So you can send an application to a single, in a sort of certain timeline, which I will show, to a one portal, and then it gets sent and it gets seen across the whole Europe in the machine learning, in the leading machine learning labs and by sort of leading machine learning researchers across Europe. Here are more information. This is the website. You can check it yourself. There is sort of nice video talking more about the program and sort of stories of also what the students doing after. And the important point is, if you want to know more, is how to join as a student. And I will show as an important is the timeline. So typically the applications are in October. So October this year, 2026. You send the application, then there are reviews, and for those who pass the first round, there are interviews happening in January and mid-February. That would be 2027, and then decisions are in sort of late 2027. So we highly encourage you to apply, and there are 3 tracks, which I will mention. There's academic, where you have an advisor, like a main lab, where you do the PhD, but also you have a co-advisor, where you spend 6 months in another lab. So it's sort of collaborative, exciting. You get to see another lab. There's also industry track, typically local, where you spend some time in a local sort of company. You have a co-advisor from the company. Typically, you work on high-impact research problems from like inspired by specific application domains. And there is a new interdisciplinary track where people work on high impact problems in biology or chemistry or physics, like which are sort of you have co-advisor in a different discipline. And with that, if there are any questions about it, you can also ask, because some of the speakers are like advisors in the program. So, and we can also answer in the chat. And with that, I will finish here. I'll stop sharing. And I will give word to Nuria, who is going to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Joseph. If there is any quick question about the PhD program, maybe they can ask now, or if it's just something quick. Otherwise, you can reach out to us also offline.
Yeah, or put it in the chat.
And put it on the chat. Yeah, and then we can answer. Yeah, we can type it. All right. So while Krishna is sharing his screen, I will introduce him. Krishna Gumadi is a scientific director at the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems and a professor of computer science at the University of Saarland in Germany. He received his PhD in 2005 and his bachelor's in 2000 from the University of Washington, the PhD in the US, and then from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, the bachelor's degree. His recent research focuses on understanding and building social computing systems that are fair, accountable, explainable, and transparent. So it couldn't be more aligned with this workshop. His work on fair and transparent machine learning, on online social networks and media platforms, on internet access networks, and on peer-to-peer systems has been widely cited, and his papers have received 15 best or outstanding paper awards, including also some test of time awards. He is also the recipient of an ERC Advanced Grant on Foundations for Fair and Social Computing. He is a fellow in the ELLIS Human-Centered Machine Learning Research Program, and today he is going to talk to us about trust and AI agents. So all yours, Krishna. You have about 20, maximum 25 minutes, so we can leave some time for questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. Perfect. Thank you, Nuria, for your kind introduction, and thanks everyone for inviting me. It's my pleasure to actually present some work that we recently started engaging in. And as many people these days in machine learning, we started looking at certain trust issues that come up in the context of large language models, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So the title of my talk is "In Agents We Trust, but Who Do Agents Trust?" This title immediately poses a question, a very simple question, which is what exactly or when exactly does an AI model become agentic? What do I mean by the word agentic here? So to understand this, here is my way of thinking about AI agents. It may not be the only way, but this is my perception or the way in which I'm dealing with it in this talk. So if you think about a lot of online platforms that are out there, whether it is digital public spaces like Facebook, social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, what have you, or digital marketplaces like Uber, Lyft, or Kickstarter, or what have you, or in decision support systems, you have a variety of different types of AI models that are used. They range from search and recommender AI to match and market making AI to risk prediction algorithms and so on. Now, the distinction that I would like to make is that there are, of course, by AI models, what we mean is some sort of a neural network in case if it is a deep learning model, or a transformer in the case of a large language model. But it is important and useful to distinguish between AI models and computing architectures that embed these AI models on these platforms. And what the computing architectures do is they make the models, or they give the models agency. That is the way in which you design the hardware and the software rules to embed these AI models in a broader platform, and the sort of the framework or the rules of the game that the deployers define for how these AI models can interact with other AI models, and as well as humans, ends up determining how much agency these models have. So let me give you a little bit of more concrete examples of what I mean by this term AI models having agency. So let's consider the first example scenario, which is increasingly something that many of you might have seen, which is LLMs, or these language models, are being used as front ends for search. Sometimes this is also more broadly viewed as retrieval augmented generation, which is one where the language model is actually fetching some documents in some database, which might well be the entire web search or the corpus of web documents. And then it's using the information from the retrieved information from the documents, and it is fusing it with its own parametric knowledge, that is the knowledge that is embedded in the neural network, to generate the final response, right? So let's consider a simple example of this. So for this, I took screenshots of my own interactions with such where AI models are being used as front ends for web search. So this is about 8 months ago. I landed in the Berlin's airport, and I had a question that I typed in my mobile phone. I asked, does Deutsche Bahn Berlin plus city ticket that I had, does it cover the trip all the way to the airport, which is actually on the outskirts of the city of Berlin? And then I was very happy when Google AI Overview, rather than just returning some links that I had to browse through and figure out what the answer is, responded by saying, yes, Deutsche Bahn plus Berlin plus city ticket includes travel to this thing. I was actually very surprised. I wasn't expecting it to be that decisive, and I was very happy. But just before I got on, I somehow wanted to double check this because I had somebody tell me before that this might not be the case. So I just refreshed the search thing, and then I got this answer. from the same thing just within a few seconds later. You can even see the timestamp of the screen. It's like exactly within the same minute of it. Now, this is the kind of a situation where essentially the AI model, for whatever reason, it did some retrieval of the things and it was summarizing the response. And in one case, it summarized it one way, and another case, it summarized it in another way. Presumably because in the documents that it retrieved, there is some information indicating both types of things. So the broader picture question that comes up is increasingly as more and more people are using LLMs as the front ends for their web search and retrieving information, how does the internal parametric knowledge of the model, which is in the neural network, impact its overall search responses? That's the question that we're interested in. What happens when retrieved results come from different sources where the information contained in them actually contradicts each other? And what happens if that knowledge actually contradicts its own parametric knowledge? How is all this fusion happening? And this is an example of a scenario where I think we have LLMs exhibiting some form of agency. And it is in this context, we had a hypothesis, which we called as the latent preference hypothesis. And it's a very simple hypothesis. At a very high level, our guess is that, and we're going to validate this through a series of experiments later that I'm going to describe, which is that LLMs today have parametric knowledge about the information sources. And what I mean by parametric knowledge about the information sources is they have some sort of a implicit notion of trust or page rank, if you will, based on the source from which the information is coming. And this knowledge actually manifests itself as some sort of a preference for information from certain sources over others. That is, our guess is that LLMs would preferentially trust information from some sources over others in a very predictable manner, because this is something that you can extract out of the language model and say, for example, that LLM will always pick a story from Spiegel over Bild. Let me talk, most of this talk will focus on this hypothesis, and this is from a recent paper that we published at ICLR, which talks about this. So this is actually work done with a number of my co-authors and colleagues and collaborators, who unfortunately I'm not going to have the time to introduce. But before I go into that, let me quickly give another example. Scenario where increasingly LLMs are acting with some form of agency, which is today we see LLMs are increasingly being augmented with tools and function calling abilities. Now, to explain what I mean by this tool or function calling, here is a simple plot where we looked at data we gathered from 300 users about their conversations with ChatGPT. So we had over 830,000 real conversations users had with ChatGPT, and we were looking at how many times the model answered using its own parametric knowledge versus in how many cases did it resort to calling some tool in the backend before it gave the final answer. So what this plot is showing is in November 2022, when ChatGPT originally started, the number of tool calls, in fact, tool calling was not even available. But today, fast forward to March 2026, almost 1 in 5 responses are aided by the model calling some external tool. And typically that thing is web search, but there are also increasingly an entire marketplace of these tools. If you have heard about something called MCP from Anthropic, the Model Context Protocols and MCP servers are nothing more than are offering tools that language models can call. And then in this context, we have another hypothesis, which we call as the latent perception hypothesis. And what we mean by this specifically is when a task is given to an LLM, like when a user types something in ChatGPT, the LLM is deciding whether or not it needs help with solving the task. And it's also deciding if it needs help, whether a particular tool that it is going to call will help it with answering it better. These are judgments that the language model has to make. But if you think about this, the information for this judgment doesn't exist in a very objective form. It's almost like you trying to decide when you need help with trying to solve a task and who might be the best person to ask for the help. And these are very difficult judgments in general. So our hypothesis is that LLM's perceptions of their need and utility of calling tools would actually differ from their true need and utility. And therefore, it will often result in these models overcalling or undercalling tools. That means they often call tools when they don't need them, and they will not call tools in scenarios where they do need them. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but just at a very high level, here is a table of the performance of different types of GPT, different types of open models, GPT, Quen, Gemma, Mistral, Llama. And what we're showing here is that the first thing with no tool is when the model tries to solve a particular task only by itself in a standalone fashion. And always tool is if we forced it to always call the tool, how would it perform? Versus optimal is what would have been the best case scenario if it only called the tools when it would actually need them. And the high order bit is calling tools does help improve performance. With tools, they do better. The score is like the quality of the response or the quality of performance in solving the task. But if you looked at the optimal versus always calling the tool, sometimes it's actually the optimal is like assuming some knowledge that the LLM does not have when it is running. This is something that we evaluated with some from an external perspective. So what it turns out is that the high order takeaway is that oftentimes you can actually do better by calling the tools fewer times. However, this optimal performance assumes an oracle that can precisely predict whether or not calling a tool would actually help the thing. In practice, you cannot design this oracle. You can try to mimic that oracle. But today, the self-decision by LLMs are far from mimicking these kinds of oracles. In fact, this is part of another submission paper that we're working on that is under submission. If you're interested in the details of this work, please feel free to look it up. And since we have a limited time, let me go back to this latent preference hypothesis and then show you some experimental results that would validate this hypothesis. Again, as a quick reminder, the basic hypothesis here is that language models have an implicit notion of trust in different sources of information. And whenever it gets a piece of information from a source that it trusts more, it will actually prefer that over other sources. It's almost like saying LLMs have an implicit page rank. Now, so the first, I want to describe this in very simple experiments rather than make it a bit more formal. You can read the paper to look at to understand a bit more formal setting that we have. So the experimental setup that we have is one of selecting news stories. So here we went to the site called allsites.com. So allsites.com is a website where every day they have all the major they cover the major events of the day around the world. But the interesting thing that they do is they have stories from right, left, and center leading news media sites about how they are covering a particular event. So for example, here they're talking about judge reordering Trump administration to rehire some employees that have been laid off. And then here if you look at the titles that are given by the right leaning versus left versus center, you'll start seeing that there is some stance that these articles are taking, even though they're talking about the exact same thing. So for example, from the left, it says, judge orders Trump to rehire things that were let go in mass firings, whereas the right says the judge orders Trump to rehire fired federal workers. So you can see the change in stance. In any case, so the setup was a very simple one. So we prompted the LLM by saying that, look, you're a seasoned and independent news editor. Your task is to select some articles that you would prefer to publish. And then what we do is tell it that a good article should be informative, should be unbiased, and so on. And then we say, here are some 3 articles from each of the 3 leanings. And then we say, pick one, right? Select one of them. So we just give the 3 articles, and then we ask it to pick one of them, and then we give a brief explanation for why you would select to publish one of the 3 articles over the others. And here, let me show you some quick results from from experimenting with GPT-4o mini before showing for all the other models. So in terms of source story selection, when we did this, what we found was that most of the time, the articles that were selected were either from the left-leaning news sources or the center-leaning news sources, rather than the right-leaning news sources. So there are very few stories from the right-leaning sources that were picked. Now, this could be for a variety of different reasons. It could be because of the content. It could be because of the style. And we don't yet know whether this is actually because of the source, right? Like the reputation that the source has. So what we did was to understand the impact of the source. Oh, one thing I should have mentioned is we give the entire text of the article, and each time we say, we also mention the source. That is, this is where we would say this is New York Times or Wall Street Journal or whatever else. And so we want to understand to what extent the source name is impacting the selection of the article. So what we did was we decided to anonymize the source. What if we gave the exact same articles, text and everything, but we just removed the source, where we say source is unknown. Then all of a sudden we see the selection of articles changing. All of a sudden there are more articles from the right-leaning side that are picked. This suggests some strong evidence for latent preferences for the sources of the information. And to further confirm this, what we did was a simple experiment where we swapped the sources. That means we showed the same articles, but then we switched the right-leaning and the left-leaning sources. So we posed as if the right-leaning article was written by New York Times and the left-leaning article was written by Wall Street Journal, say, for example. And then all of a sudden, when we swap the left and right, in fact, the choices also switch in a very predictable manner. And the same thing with center and right as well. So all these things, what they're showing is a strong evidence for latent preference for sources. It's the sources that is actually driving the selection, even more than the content of the articles themselves. Now, we also wanted to see whether because we asked it to explain its preferences, whether in the explanations, would the model actually admit that it's being influenced by the source? Now, it turns out that explanations do really reveal some of these source preferences, but it's not all the time. It reveals around 40% of the time. And then we wanted to do another simple experiment where we said, okay, what if we try to tell the LLM, don't be biased by your impressions about the sources, right? What if we explicitly instructed the LLM to not be swayed by your preconceived notions about certain news sources and focus solely on the quality of the article? What would happen? Like, can we actually debias it by giving it explicit instructions? And what happened when we did this was that the results didn't change in terms of the decisions of choice of the articles. But interestingly, in the explanations, it stopped referring to the source preferences. In other words, the final decisions it was making were exactly the same, but excepting that in this case, in the explanations, it would never mention that it was biased by the source. So it's sort of like implicitly lying rather than changing the final decision. So in other words, implicit bias training is not as straightforward as changing a prompt in these kinds of things. Now, we also did some extensive experiments across different models, GPT, Llama, Quen, Phi, and Mistral. And one of the interesting things that we found was that most models do show strong preferences. I'm not expecting to go through all these pictures here. I'm sorry for this being so information dense. But the interesting thing is the smaller models consistently exhibit weaker preferences. So when we compared Llama 1 billion with 8 billion, and Quen 1 billion with 7 billion, and Phi Mini with 5.4, which is a bigger model, the bigger models always have stronger source preferences, whereas the weaker models are seemingly indifferent to the sources. That means they don't seem to have as much picked up as much preferences for certain sources of information over others. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some additional experiments we did where we tried to avoid confounders by actually generating synthetic news articles synthetic news articles so that we have the same content that is written in slightly different styles, but which we assign then to various different news media platforms to see which, in other words, to sort of extract what sort of preferences, which media sources are more preferred than others. So in the process, you can actually come up with a ranking or a page rank, implicit page rank that, or the implicit trust rank that the model has for various different news sources. So here, for example, what this picture is showing is that Quen actually more or less prefers all media sources similarly. So in terms of the win percentages for the competitions that we conducted, when you say that a news source is an article is from one source versus another, it's somewhat equal for Quen 1.5 billion, but then GPT-4o Mini, you see a clear preference towards certain sources than others. And these sources include those from the US, China, and Europe as well. So you can kind of extract these sorts of things from the different models. So I'm going to skip over, but in the paper we show whether these things are correlated with geographies and models. That means are the models from China or models from Europe preferring European sources or Chinese sources more than the US in terms of their trust. The high order bit is surprisingly, perhaps, they don't show, all of them are more or less, all of them have similar rankings or similar sorts of rankings for trust in the news sources, and they actually don't vary that much based on the place or the location of the developers of these models. So I'm going to skip over some more things about how good they are at recognizing expertise. That is whether when the topic where the information has to be selected from changes from, say, some broader news information about general news to being very specific about, say, for example, articles related to research in different domains like computational linguistics versus computer vision versus health and medicine versus math and physics. In these situations, we also try to see whether the models would prefer actually papers or information from information that is published in venues that are more highly reputed, like journals or conferences that are more highly reputed for those particular topics. And it actually turns out that these models have a very good sense of which venues are more prestigious or more reputed for these different domains. So, for example, when we asked it to pick some papers to recommend for a university level seminar courses, what we found was that when it came to computational linguistics, it was preferring papers that were published at ACL and the EMNLP, whereas when you change it to computer vision and pattern recognition seminar, it was picking papers from CVPR and ICCV and so on. And notice that in this particular experiment, we were keeping the articles the same. We were playing this game of asking it to pick from a selected set of articles. The game that we were playing was we were just changing the place or the venue where we were claiming that these articles were published. So in other words, source preferences actually vary based on domain expertise. So to conclude, there are a number of open questions that we can discuss, which is how do these latent preferences emerge, particularly during pre-training and fine-tuning? That's an interesting question to think through. And there is a question of should we be engineering LLMs to prefer some sources, or is the right thing to do to be neutral to all sources? This is again a policy question as well, because it's not clear that it's a bad thing if LLMs actually preferred some sources of information over others. But then we need to be aware of the biases they introduce down the road. And then there is this bigger picture, broader question of how do we enable trustworthy and unbiased generative AI search if that's the direction in which the world is headed. And here we may have to think through the fact that the cognitive biases of the humans and the LLMs may be different. And there is a question of like what sort of trust in sources should the LLMs actually learn to have, and should it be the same as what humans have? Should it be personalized? And all these other questions come up. So with that, I'm going to stop and take any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Krishna. This was a very very interesting talk. And I see there is one question, but before moving to the question, I have a really, probably other people have asked you, but why didn't you include Grok in your study?
Yes. So we are actually doing that going forward. At the time when we did this, we didn't include, we didn't think that Grok was a major one, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
We are doing some work in terms of looking at the conversations people are having on various different conversational AI platforms. So we're taking this approach of asking people to donate their chat data. And there we find that we do see striking differences between how people are interacting with Grok versus other conversational AI platforms.
Yeah, like on the jailbreak project that I presented, it was an outlier. In many fronts, it's an outlier. That's why I think it could be very interesting to possibly corroborate or not some potential hypotheses as to why these preferences, are emerging. Alan Smeaton has a question. It says the New York Times published an article last month where the accuracy of Google's AI overviews was analyzed using simple Q&A. And the underlying models were earlier versions of Gemini, but even with Gemini 3, the AI overviews were accurate 91% of the time, or put another way, they were incorrect 9% of the time. This means that the AI overviews have tens of millions of wrong answers every hour. And you had an example, right, in your example about the Berlin. So how do such fundamental inaccuracies in underlying FMs impact your work and your results?
So I think this is a very this is a bit of a high level question in the sense of this is what I've been pondering ever since I got this. In fact, I will admit that this response made me wonder, like, about this sort of a question. Like, increasingly, if I notice that even, I don't know if this is a more broader phenomena, but I at least start these days, whenever I do search, I start paying a lot of attention to the AI overview, which is summarizing the results of the search, right? As opposed to actually browsing the links myself. In the process, there is a chance that we are being misled because we are relying on the LLM to summarize the information from us, right? So this actually poses, this actually feels like a very important problem that needs to be studied more. And that's all I'm afraid I can say at this point. I personally wish that there were that this is something that more people looked at, because I believe that many, or I have a feeling that today there is an assumption being made when LLMs are being deployed as front ends, that the tools or the web search responses will somehow all be good or correct. And therefore, all that the model needs to do is summarize them, right? But the top K search results can have very different, can sometimes make very different points, particularly when you're doing search for medical information or something like that, right? You could have a top search result that contradicts the information given in the second ranked search result. In those cases, how should the LLM summarize this information?
Yeah, I mean, something else that I have observed, I actually don't actually trust any of these AI summaries myself. And something that I have observed too is that they're very context dependent. Like if you're in different locations, you can get different answers. Even when the context shouldn't matter, for questions that are really not about locations of things, where, it could matter where you are. So I do, and I think your history is used if you're logged in versus in a private mode. Like, I think there is a lot of factors that play a role in reweighting, the information to decide what to include in the summaries. And I think it's completely obscure right now as how these summaries are created. So I don't think it's even necessarily a summary of the top search results. I think there are other factors that are taken into account on top of that.
Yes. I noticed
there's another comment. There's another question. Agreed, Nuria. Thank you, Alan.
I can also answer very quickly this question. Doesn't it read tools metadata to prefer tools?
Sorry. Oh, I didn't
Yes,
see. Yeah,
no worries.
sorry.
This is actually a very fascinating question. So at a high level, there is a thing of like, how does it, when this is about this latent, I guess what I was calling as a perception hypothesis, which is when an LLM is deciding which tool to use, how is it making that decision? Yes, it will be influenced by the tool metadata. That is, what is, for those who are not familiar, whenever you're trying to connect an LLM to an external tool, what you do is you describe how to call the tool, right? There is a description of the tool, which is about how to invoke the tool. But there is also some additional information that describes when to call the tool, or in what situations the tool might be helpful, right? As you can imagine, this is a very difficult thing to communicate in just a few sentences to the LLM when the tool is reliable versus not reliable, especially for the hundreds of thousands of tools that you have there, right? So, for example, just for web search, there is Google based SERP tool, there is Tabili, there is Brave Search, there is Perplexity. There's lots of web search tools. How should a model know which web search tool to use today? Now, today, the LLMs just get a description from the tool developers themselves. What if the tool developer said, this is a phenomenal 100% accurate tool? Today, we just pass it on to the LLM, which is, if you think about it, kind of ridiculous. Like, shouldn't there be like I mean, this is all part of the tool harness, right? As people call it. So this is what I mean by saying the harness is the thing that gives agency to these AI models. This is the part of the architecture of deployment for the AI models. And this is where I feel there is a lot more attention that needs to be paid than what is being paid today, because that essentially ends up determining what happens.
Yeah, very good. Unfortunately, I think we are now out of time. So thank you so much, Krishna, for a wonderful and really stimulating presentation. And I think we can move on to the next speaker. And by the way, Krishna, just as a reminder, we have the human-centric machine learning workshop next week in case you can make it. Okay, wonderful.
I will attend online for some parts of it.
Okay,
looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So next, thank you very much, Krishna. It was fantastic. Thank you. Fantastic talk. And next, I would like to invite again Tatiana Zakarchenko, who is one of the workshop co-organizers and founding director of the new Center for Data, AI and Society at the Ukrainian Catholic University. She will tell us about it later, but she will now introduce the speaker. Tatiana, please introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. So I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Laisa Semyonova. She's the assistant professor of computer science at Rutgers University in the United States, where she leads a research group on safe, trustworthy, and interpretable AI. Before joining Rutgers, Laisa was a postdoctoral researcher at Microsoft Research in New York, and she received her PhD in computer science from Duke University. Her work contributes to the foundation of interpretable machine learning and develops methods that use model multiplicity to support robustness and safer decision-making in high-stakes domains, including healthcare and public policy. She will speak about from model uncertainty to trust, safe and interpretable AI under the Rashomon effect. So, Laisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, for introduction. And thank you, everyone, for the amazing workshop. I have been enjoying all of the talks. I will share my screen. Okay, great. So at Rutgers, I lead Trace AI Lab, and we study transparency of AI and ML models. And today I would like to talk about safety through personalization. And essentially, when I think about questions that are interesting to asking, one of them is like, how do we make AI systems that we can truly understand, trust, and rely on? And when we ask this question, when you think about this alignment, we often mean aligning AI with human values. So, and overall, huge teams of researchers and engineering are working right now to make sure that these models are less harmful For example, by filtering toxic comments or like more neutral to counter some biases in online data. And these are like some behavioral safeguards that we like all want models to have, hopefully by default. But there is another like deeper level of that alignment, less understood. And that's where things get interesting because it's extremely contextual. So it depends what user wants, what they do not want, what they believe the model should understand about them. And one side of my work focuses on how we can make these AI models not only safer in general, but also responding to the intent by studying diversity of different passes that AI system or ML model can take to achieve some specific goal. And in reality, very rarely there is one single golden answer. Very often we just have many different perspectives to solve the same problem. For example, let's say that we just want to understand which number is this, and we already can have a different perspective given how we look at it from one side or another one, and we can have multiple answers. And this is known as a Rashomon effect. Essentially, it's like when we can have the same view on the data, on the same evidence, but it may have a different explanation to it. And Rashomon effect occurs when we have the same data supporting the different phenomena. And very interesting question is then, because like very often we have been taught to optimize for one single model, is then which model should I actually choose? And today I would like to talk about if you have that desired data in mind. So let's say that we want to optimize for interpretability, fairness, robustness, or privacy. In other words, caring about properties that we should care about when we deploy our models in real world. Then this existence of many good models actually allows us for personalized model selection. And let me give you an example of that. I've been working with a team of doctors, and we've been trying to study the epilepsy. And it occurs for a lot of people. It occurs around for 50 million people worldwide. And essentially, we have no idea why it's actually occurring. We know that we can detect some EEG recording and try to detect spikes. And still like studying where the spike occurs, how to acknowledge it, how to try to find that proof for that is very important, especially for people who are having seizures. And the data that we have been provided by the doctors have been quite interesting. So they had one-dimensional recordings with the goal to do final classification alongside the probability of having that spike. So right now on the screen from the left to right, you can see like almost like a probability of having that spike, where the leftmost model is the ones that most likely don't have any spikes, and the rightmost model are the ones that are having spikes. And essentially our goal was to try to look for these discharges, these changes in data, where we would like say, okay, this may not have a spike and this might have a spike. And because we were working with this team of doctors, we had a very highly trained domain experts on the team. So we wanted to try and design something a little bit better than a black box model. So we look into interpretable modeling, and we ask a question of the form, can we design a model that has some inherently interpretable reasoning towards how it's making its decision? In other words, we looked into proto-PNets, or models that perform this looks like that reasoning in the following form. Give it some input, and here I have different channels like that are meaningful for EEG recording. So given some input, I want to find best matches in my data sets that have occurred before me, so that I can say, I have classified this input as having a seizure because I saw another inputs in my data, and I definitely know that they are having a seizure based on what my domain experts have provided me as labels that they have given to me. So this allows for any classifications that I'm making to have some proof towards it, because now we know how the model makes a decision and what it relies on. And just to give you a little bit of understanding to uncover that, how we uncovered that black box, we had the following structure. So, and we call this proto-EEG Canaan architecture. So essentially we had some input, and then we took as a backbone-based best model in the class, which in that time was SpikeNet model, and it was achieving like around 80% accuracy. And then we computed our EEG embedding. So that would be like the standard black box performance. But then we added something new, which is global global comparison layer, it essentially computes the similarity between embedding and each sample in the training set. And we compute the similarity by multiplying each channel overall similarity and channel-wise weight. So, and we also added some interpretable features to this data just to help the model to understand the signal better, such as a range, variance, and some signal frequencies coming from Fourier transform from the input. And then we were able to finally compute some predictions, which is the average label for top k most similar neighbors, and we use k equal to 10. So now, equipped with this model, we're able to do this interpretable reasoning and have a very simple answers. So this input looks like those inputs, and that's why we have classified it as having a spike. And further, we could study by channels and visualize a top plot where in the brain it could possibly occur, which was very interesting for our doctors as it aligned with some type of their domain knowledge. So this kind of like process shows us that even given some medical data, we can design interpretable models to help doctors understand the data and analyze them. But a way more interesting process has been happening on the back end, on the engineering process of designing this whole methodology that took us approximately 2 years. And it was like this. So we started with the first model. As I mentioned, it was a SpikeNet model, and it was around 80% accurate. So, and we said, okay, now we're going to try our interpretable model. So we tried ProtoPNet, we got our second model, it beat baseline, it was 80% accurate. We went to our doctors. We said, here is a great model. It's interpretable. It performs as good as the best model in class that you had. And they said, we have no idea what it's doing. We just don't understand it. It aligns matches that are not like useful for us. It's not how we make decisions. So we said, okay, can you please educate us? How do you make a decision? Like what should be important for making this EEG prediction? And as we went through this process, we realized why doctors spend a lot of time in training because it's a very complex process. You don't only analyze the spikes, the foreground information, but also the background information. And also some doctors disagree on a very important corner cases. So as you notice, our performance is around 80, and this is the best that we can get. So it's not 100. There is some inherent noise to our data. So, but we kept trying. So we tried another model, and we went overall through like a couple of iterations, around 10 or so. And finally, our doctors told us, okay, we like this model. It more or less corresponds to how we would make a decision. It is interesting. Let's try to test it on like the domain experts. So we had a human study, and indeed that model was doing quite well. And if I would map this whole process into the hypothesis space, so let's say I have a whole space of models, and then I had that baseline model, which would be SpikeNet. And now I'm going through how I'm making my decisions, mapping one model, another one. They all have been accurate and all had very different properties. From some model that was completely black box to some models that was completely interpretable and aligned with our domain experts. So I call this set of near optimal models that have the same performance a Rashomon set. Essentially, it's as if I take my baseline model, which was SpikeNet, and look at its performance, either measured in terms of true and empirical risk, typically empirical, since it's what we have access to, and then look at the performance of all models that are below a threshold that was defined by this best model in class, and some parameter, which I would call Rashomon parameter. And it doesn't have to be anything large. It could be 0% or 1% of the loss, but essentially it determines how much we are willing to sacrifice for some model diversity. And these two quantities, the performance of best model in class and Rashomon parameter, determines a threshold that I will look under and consider all possible models that will form this Rashomon set. So now if you remember our goal in mind, where we said, oh, can we actually choose models that align with some different properties that we desire? So now we know that like unwillingly going through this spike detection process, we explored the Rashomon set. And we were able to find a good interpretable models that aligned with our needs. So the key takeaway of today's talk would be the following. If we have large Rashomon set, which is a set of near optimal models, we can simply search for the desirable property. Now, interestingly, if our property changes, we can search for it again. And I would like to pause here for a second, because I think the existence of this large Rashomon set, it changes a lot how we approach optimization in ML and AI. We used to optimize for one single model. And what this whole process is telling us is that very often, especially for high-stakes decision domains, especially when you have some inherent noise present, there is no one single model. There are multiple of them. So maybe optimizing for that set of models can give you better results towards the end, especially if you know that some different properties would be desired and studied in the future. Okay, so I've been using this word Rashomon, and I would like to give you a little bit of backstory about it. So it takes its way from Akiba Kurosawa movie, and it's 1950 film, and it occurred around 4 characters. And then later they were asked, they all relived the same tragic event, and then later in court were asked what happened, and they gave very, very different, even contradictory statements. And later in 2001, Leo Brayman was playing with linear models, and he noticed that very often you can have the same linear model with exactly the same performance, but relying on very different coefficients. And we know that those are associated with feature importance. So essentially, by relying on different coefficients, they mean that they highlight different properties, different feature importance of the data. So, and that's how he introduced Rashomon effect into machine learning, saying that what I call the Rashomon effect is where often there is a multiple explanations in the same functional class for the same minimum error rate. And in fact, in my research across different domains, I notice it everywhere. So for example, for tabular data, there have been explainable challenge in explainable AI FICO challenge. And the dataset was given that tries to predict trustworthiness of the credit of the users. And here is a visualization of different methods with different complexities from different hypothesis spaces in terms of test accuracy and test AUC performing on the same dataset. And you can see here we have all possible variety of models, from something like simple linear model, like logistic regression, to more complex 8-layer neural networks, to some interpretable models such as 2-layer additive risk models. So they're all interpretable models, I in blue and black box I in orange. And you can see that all of them have similar test accuracy and test AUC as well, basically meaning that performance are equal, and all of these models belong to the Rashomon set. Similarly, we can observe in language. So for example, if our prompt is underspecified, let's say ask a question, how many restaurants are on the main street? There are so many answers to it. Main street in which city? Or like which restaurant I'm specifically looking for? So legitimately for my epistemic uncertainty prompt, there could be a lot of different answers to it. Or even if I don't have any underspecifications, there could be representation ambiguity. So for example, it has been shown that you can take BERT models, and just by changing the random seed, you can have very different performance of those, where one would actually learn some robust like language rules, and the other one will rely on spurious correlations. Then interesting question is like, why does this effect occur? And one was a reason we already explored right here, which is underspecification. Maybe I didn't specify my problem enough. I chose wrong hypothesis space, I didn't train enough, maybe I didn't design good constraints, so naturally there could be that model uncertainty. But the more interesting use cases are the ones that come directly from the data, especially human data, high-stakes decision data, because everything about us as a humans is tied to randomness in the world. Things can change, we can lose job, get job, gain weight, lose weight, change our diets, and all of this can influence into how predictions about us are being made. So we make a direct connection between noise in our data generation processes, noise in high-stakes decision domains, to a simplicity of the models and to existence of the Rashomon effect. There could also be inherent diversity in our data problem solution. So for example, if I'm solving a math problem, there could be legitimately multiple ways that are 100% accurate, so there is no noise, to achieve the same answer. A very simple example to see that is another type of interpretable neural networks, which are concept bottleneck models. And instead of relying on some inputs from on some samples from my training data, they actually predict human understandable concepts, whereas these concepts could be predefined or discovered. And here I'm showing the result from one of the methods that we have developed to help to compute the Rashomon set of these concept bottleneck models. And you can see that given a class of tigers, so let's say we want to understand which model, why the model predicted this specific image as class tiger, we can see that the model rely on different reasoning. So for example, one model can look into some properties such as being strong, where another model can look into the color of the tiger, such as being orange. And another model can look at the speed, which is being fast. And they can also utilize some negative information. Like, for example, the tigers do not swim. Well, maybe they do, but at least not to predicting the tiger as it is, or some things that as they don't have a long neck. So essentially, this gives us different ways in which models can predict the same class from different perspectives. And then as a domain experts of people who know what we want to model properties to have or not to have, we can select the one that we will like the most to be deployed. And this Rashomon CBMs is one example how we can compute Rashomon set. It relies on optimizing diversity loss, which we define based on cosine similarity, and also LoRa adapters. But there are way more methods that right now allow us to compute Rashomon set. Even something simple as unstructural exploration, as we had in the epilepsy example, can help. Simply by changing the random seed, we can already sample models from the Rashomon set. Very often we do it during hyperparameter tuning. When we do some sweep of the hyperparameters, we would actually check as our performance, we already would form Rashomon set. However, there are methods that allowed more structural exploration, such as prototypical neural networks. So that's the one that we studied in the epilepsy example. There is a method that explicitly allows to study Rashomon set of prototypical neural nets. Or there are methods for more simpler hypothesis spaces, such as trees or generalized additive models. And specifically for sparse trees, these methods are very interesting because they allow us to compute the Rashomon set exactly. So we know that all of the models that we have computed exactly belong to the Rashomon set. None are excluded, none are that should not be there. It's like we can compute it as it is. And interestingly, having these methods can help us study multiple properties of the Rashomon sets or prove or disprove our points. So for example, one of the things that we considered is trying to benchmark Rashomon sets on these properties that such as robustness. Let's say we want to understand how robust is model to some adversarial attacks, or stability, how stable it is to noise. How private it is if somebody would do membership inference attack, as if trying to inquire if the given example can be part of your training data given your model only. Or fairness, where we want so there would not be disparities between different groups. And having this algorithm for computing the Rashomon set of trees, which is exact, we said, okay, let me try to take all of the methods that optimize for this desired data directly. So I know that their objective would be optimize on accuracy subject to these desired data constraints. But now I'm going to compute my Rashomon set based on accuracy only. And then I will compare, does that Rashomon set maybe already contains model that are close in performance on these desired data properties? And turns out it does. So here is a visualization of based on benchmark German credit data set, where on x-axis I have fairness, which is a disparity, and on y-axis I have accuracy, and in both cases higher is better. Now blue blob describes my Rashomon set, so each dot is essentially a model in the Rashomon set, and we show here accuracy and fairness, and each of the colorful dot describes my different methods. So, and these methods are optimal tree methods that have been optimized for accuracy and fairness simultaneously. And you can see that for each of the method performance, we can find similar model. And it may not be the same, right? But we can find a model with similar performance in this Rashomon set, essentially telling me that we can explicitly optimize for trustworthiness. So what does it mean for the bigger picture? Let's say I have my Rashomon set, and we already know there are methods to compute models from it. So if I have some predefined properties, such as robust models, I can find it there. Or fair models, I can still find it there. Interpretable models or privacy-preserving models, which leads us to our takeaway. If we have large Rashomon set, we can simply search for the desirable property and say it changes. So maybe we decided to be interpretable and private. We can search for it again. So this leads to this interesting conclusion where I do think that the uncertainty itself, the Rashomon set itself, should be a policy object. And it's essentially important because some of these properties can have trade-offs. For example, if I could consider robustness and privacy, especially privacy as if releasing some information leak around my data set, these properties can be trade-off given the Rashomon set. More specifically, the more models I disclose, so the more models I would change in the production by taking from the set of near optimal models, the more information I leak to the adversary so they can design a better attack against my data, against my system. And essentially studying these all properties in unifying form is very important. Besides trying to study each property in isolation, using the Rashomon set, we can also build an argument that shows why simple interpretable models should be the default. Essentially, the argument is like this, which is summarized in these papers. Very often, as we mentioned, the high decision domains data are very noisy. And that noise is one of the reasons why we will automatically regularize more on the noisy data. So essentially, noise acts as an implicit regularizer that leads us to simpler models within the Rashomon set. Or even if we don't have Rashomon set exactly, so let's say there was some interesting domain where we couldn't compute it exactly, we can still approximate it and use it to design a better multiplicity of our algorithms. And we did so for explainable AI. And this is part of the work with students from Ukraine, from Kanu and Uku, that was accepted to NeurIPS last year. So essentially, we approximated the Rashomon set and were able to design better explainability, more robust algorithms. So taking all together, I would like you to leave with 3 takeaways that help us transform this source of uncertainty, which it is, to foundation for trust, which we can essentially select models for our personalized goals. First, if you have large Rashomon set, we can search for desirable property. Second, if you work in high-stakes decision domains, think about interpretable models first. We do have a formal proof that says if you expect larger Rashomon sets, those interpretable models will exist in it. And third, we can use that multiplicity of our knowledge to design a better algorithms for our trustworthy decision making. And there are a lot of future directions. I truly believe that we should keep building uncertainty-aware Rashomon set pipelines and algorithms. And some of the open directions include the causes of the Rashomon set. We talked about noise, we talked about underspecification, but there could be so much more reasons why it occurs. Maybe it comes from feature redundancy or collinearity. There could be more studies on different types of noise. How do we find or represent Rashomon sets at scale? It only occurs in vision language model and large language models, and not only at the model size. It's a multiplicity of representation and multiplicities that can occur within different layers as well. Then how do we display these Rashomon sets for human model interactions? So what I didn't mention is that sometimes for some benchmark data sets, the size of the Rashomon set can get up to millions of models or even 1 billion of models. It's a lot of models to choose from. So we do need more interactive frameworks to help humans to interact with this huge set of models. And finally, how do we address some individual arbitrariness in the deployment? So imagine having 1 billion of models, and then it affects somebody's life. And now we know that this model will, of course, disagree on prediction for some personal, let's say, me applying for credit. So different models will disagree. And then it creates an issues as if I applied for credit and I know I'm denied by one model, I could be approved by another model. So this individual arbitrariness should be resolved in deployment as well. So thank you for your attention, and hopefully we can all, as next time as you optimize for some property, think about multiplicity and some desired data as well.
You guys are so interesting, really. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yeah, we have question, actually 2 questions from Manir Garsala. So I guess I will ask you as the first one and then move to the next, okay? So when the medical doctor said about the TENS model, you know what? Do you like this model? Do you have any metric to assess the likability of ML model to the decision makers? I mean, either that in human study, something like ML model quality of experience assessment approach, or especially since there are still black box are not fully explainable. So that's the first question.
Thank you so much for asking it. This is an excellent question. A very short answer is that I do not have a very principled answer to this. This is a very complicated question. But one possible way could be task-dependent performance. So in our specific case, epilepsy is a complex problem. So even though we ask doctors, can you please teach us how do you make these decisions? We couldn't fully understand it, even like with like a 30-minute description, which means that it's a way more complex something to be taught than we could just do. But they, for example, told us, you know, background information and foreground information are both important. So that help us to like guide intuition further into model development. So one way to assess likability could be a very specific task-grounded metric. So for example, let's say, does this model take into account both foreground and background? Or does the signal between channels is very different compared to some specific measurement? So essentially, even though it's hard to assess it in the big picture, we could still design some simple task-dependent evaluations to help us in that sense, and indeed reduce the number of iterations that we went through.
Right, and another like continuation of the previous, do you also consider the observer effect in the Rashomon effect, where the fact of thinking about the object in human studies alters the human feedback outcome? These are my questions about bias and trust under human-centric AI decision-making under uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a really great question. So actually, this would be a really great, you know, future studies type of work. Here is why. Typically, when we compute Rashomon set, we don't have human involved. So we compute it based on the data that we have. And only after we computed it, we add human to the picture. And then we say, okay, here is a multiplicity of models. What would you like? But I think what you're asking is way more interesting. What if the human knew from the beginning there is a Rashomon set? So I think that will help us to guide maybe to better summaries or better like finding like subset of the Rashomon set more aligned with human goals to begin with, which is very interesting, but I don't think it has been done yet, which could be a great future work.
Thank you so much again for joining and like for everything that you already done for Ukraine too.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to be here today. Thank you for invitation.
Thank you very much. Fantastic talk. So thank you very much. So the next we have two shorter talks, and I'll let Rostislav please to introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. And now I have a great pleasure of introducing the next speaker. Next speaker is Valentin Melnichuk. Valentin is a PhD candidate at the Institute of AI in Management at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. Valentin's research lies at the intersection of causal machine learning, treatment effect estimation, and probabilistic modeling. All of these things are very closely related to our today's topics. So his work is particularly vital to today's theme, just because he doesn't just focus on model performance. He investigates the core of reliability, fairness, and safety in AI systems. So today, Valentin will share his insights on a very interesting topic of causal machine learning under privacy constraints. And Valentin, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Rostislav. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you for invitation. I'm really flattered to be able to talk about the research in our group. My name is Valentin, and I am about to finish my PhD at the LMU Munich, and here today I want to talk about one of our latest papers. Yeah, this work was done. I'm actually a second author. The first author, Mareza, she couldn't join today, unfortunately, but she kind of provided the presentation, and yeah, it was a pleasure to work with her, and also Professor Feurigel. And basically, what I would discuss today would be our ICLR 2025 paper called Differentially Private Learners for Heterogeneous Treatment Effects. And to start with basically the motivation for the project. The project itself kind of combines two areas of reliable or safe machine learning. So causal machine learning on itself already kind of formalizes the idea of decision making, or how can we make better treatments, better individualized treatments, or it tries to estimate the treatment effects from data in a very reliable and formal way. And privacy itself also allows us to kind of share the data sets. It allows us to share certain statistics of the data sets in a way that we cannot identify anyone's identity. And consider the following problem that we have. We have a patient data which we want to use for heterogeneous treatment effect estimation, so that we can understand what drugs are effective for what parts of population. So here, for example, we know that heterogeneous treatment effects really allow to say, for example, for old people, some treatment might be more effective. For younger generation, it might be basically even detrimental. So kind of allows us to go beyond the averages and say like, oh, for specifically for me, whether certain medication would be effective. And recently, there is a whole bunch of causal machine learning methods developed specifically to kind of target the heterogeneous treatment effects. And they all sort of would rely on these large data sets, which are observational, and they come from electronic health records, for example. And those electronic health records, they contain multiple of like a lot of private data, for example, some clinical measurements, diagnosis, what sort of medications were administered, etc. And essentially, we face a problem that it's a very sensitive data that we use, and in many countries, or I mean also in European Union, there are a lot of regulations that basically oblige us to care about privacy or to enforce the strong privacy guarantees. Why do we want to use the differential privacy specifically? I mean, in principle, there are way simpler approaches. For example, you can have pseudonymization. So for example, you just remove some direct identifiers like names or IDs from the data set, or you just change them with some random tokens. However, this approach is prone to, it's not super stable. So by just using other features like zip code, or like the combination of zip code and date of birth, we can already kind of match this medical data with some other data set, and then we can de-identify people. We can also try to mask. For example, we just throw away those columns, for example, date of birth. However, in this way, we kind of remove the useful information, so we wouldn't be able to have this treatment effect prediction, which also kind of considers the age. So, and again, there is no formal guarantee that it wouldn't be possible to de-identify people. And the same also holds for more formal definitions of anonymization, for example, k-anonymity. In this case, we would kind of try to change the data so that we wouldn't be able to distinguish any person from k minus one other units in the database. However, this approach is also prone to the attacks, and it's quite hard to implement for high-dimensional data. Therefore, in our work, we considered the concept of differential privacy. So I think it's around 20 years old, and it was proposed as a formal way to kind of release some summaries or some descriptions of the data set without actually revealing anyone's private information. So specifically here, I mean that if we want to build the epsilon delta differential private algorithm or mechanism or summary, essentially we perturb our mechanism in such a way that for every two neighboring data sets, D and D prime, neighboring means that they differ only in one patient, for example, or one unit of measurement. It's like the outputs of those mechanisms or summaries differ only with a very small probability. And here epsilon denotes the privacy budget, and we also allow for some delta, which is called failure probability. And essentially that differential privacy ensures that whatever algorithm that we run on one data set, its output is almost indistinguishable from the same algorithm being run on the dataset D prime with a certain probability. And also in the original paper on the differential privacy, one of the simplest ways to ensure it was it's called the output perturbation. So essentially, whenever we have some algorithm or some machine learning algorithm, or even if we calculate some statistics like average of all the ages or average over some other column, we perturb this the estimated average with the Gaussian noise, and the Gaussian noise essentially considers what's the so-called delta, so it's L2 sensitivity. So it says what's the worst possible difference between those two mechanisms, and then it kind of considers this L2 sensitivity and adds the noise proportional to that sensitivity. So essentially, if there is a way to spill this private information, the Gaussian noise perturbation essentially kind of overrides it with noise. And the fundamental problem here is that this sensitivity, L2 sensitivity, is in general very hard to get, and we'll talk about it further in the presentation. And just gonna give a quick background on the efficient estimation of conditional average treatment effects, or as I mentioned before, heterogeneous treatment effects. What we face is we have this sort of unusual regression problem. So we have a data set where we have confounders, we have a binary treatment, and we have some sort of outcome of interest. And we want to essentially estimate the treatment effect of A on Y. But we want to not just get a specific number, we want to build a regression function. So we say conditionally on the covariance X, what would be the effect? And for that, we use the useful definitions of other regressions. For example, we will later use the propensity score, so the probability of getting treatment, and the outcome functions. So the conditional expectation of the outcome given X and given A. And what we want to learn or estimate is the conditional average treatment effect. So the difference of potential outcome given treatment minus potential outcome without the treatment, conditional on the specific patient covariates. And in general, it's like, because for every patient we only observe one outcome, but not the other one, not the counterfactual outcome. In general, this is impossible to learn. So we actually need to make the causal assumption, for example, that the X is a set of all the confounders and there are no other confounders. And under those assumptions, we essentially can reduce it to the difference in the conditional like outcome functions or conditional mean of the outcome. And a very standard way to build models for gait estimation is so-called two-stage meta-learners. The way they proceed is that they first fit the nuisance functions, and then they essentially, with any model of choice, that's why they're called meta-learners, and then you fix them. And at the second stage, we fit the target model that serves as the estimator of our gait. And what we want to do in our project, essentially, we want to provide the private predictor of gait. Yeah, in a also model agnostic way, so that we don't develop a specific privacy, like the privacy guarantees for a specific machine learning model, but for general class of any possible regression or classification. I mean, in our case, it's a regression. And here is, yeah, I'm just gonna quickly go through the numer orthogonality and numer orthogonal meta-learners. So if we wanna learn gait, we essentially need to use the nuisance functions, because, as I said, we do not, for every single patient, we only observe one outcome, but not the other. So we need to do imputations. And in general, we can formulate the fitting model for gait as the regression of mu1 minus mu0. And then we regress our second stage model on this difference. And then we can also apply some weights. And usually, if we would just do the blind, we would blindly plug in mu0, mu1, we would have too much error coming from the first stage of estimation. So there is a whole theory, essentially, that we can additionally use the propensity score, and then we can kind of remove the first order bias coming from this estimators of outcome functions. And yeah, the specific formulas are a little bit threatening, but essentially what the orthogonalization of the numer orthogonal of the gait meta-learners mean is that we essentially now regress the second stage model on some pseudo outcome, which is comprised of again, it's a difference mu1 minus mu0, but now we have a special debiasing factor, which kind of removed this first order error. And it also depends on the propensity scores. And there are different examples. For example, there is a DR learner, which does no weighting, and then, but then it kind of has high variance because we divide by propensity score. There is also R learner, where we learn gait only in overlapping parts of the population. Yeah, if anyone has a questions, yeah, I'll be happy to talk after our talk. But what we did in our paper, essentially, we extended the traditional gait meta-learners so that they can be proven to be differentially private. So in our paper, we first fit, again, separately fit the private estimators of the nuisance functions. And then given those, we want to essentially release the model predictions for the second stage model. However, to privatize them, we need to add this sort of noise mechanism, we need to add a certain amount of noise. And in this case, we also consider the Gaussian noise mechanisms. And the only remaining problem is that to release the function, we like all this differentially private theory works well for finite dimensional outputs. But because we want to release the full function, we have to apply some tricks. And in our case, we came up with two practical solutions. So the first one, we might just want to release the fixed number of queries. We say like for this specific subpopulations, we release the kit, and then we never touch the original model anymore. Or there is also some works done for functional queries, but then we have to fit specific models, for example, at the second stage, for example, Gaussian processes. And essentially in our work, in the case one, we came up with a couple of new propositions. So in order to, for the finite amount of queries, we use the nice theory to kind of get this L2 sensitivity. We saw that it could be upper bounded by the gross error sensitivity, which actually consider it's like an influence function depending on this whole second stage estimation procedure. And there are a lot of math here, but essentially what we came up with is this sort of the scalar of the noise, which we need to add to kind of preserve the privacy. And we proved that even if when we add this noise, we do not, the properties of Newman orthogonality and quasi-occurral efficiency, they remain. So as in like, it's still possible to do some sort of consistent estimation. And the noise that we add is this small o of 1 divided by n. It kind of scales. It goes to 0 as we increase the dataset size. And in the second case, we considered, we kind of developed a specific way to fit the Gaussian processes. So at the end, we essentially add a zero-centered Gaussian process, which is again scaled with respect to the with respect to how varying is this second stage pseudo outcome. Yeah, and so essentially, our project is again, it kind of showed how that achieving differential privacy in kind of complicated setting of treatment effect estimation is very non-trivial, and in my opinion, there has to be more research done on that. Yeah, if you want to actually like publicly release some Kate models in a private way. Yeah, thank you so much for attention. Yeah. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Valentin. Are there any questions? Yes, there is one.
Yeah, okay, Q&A.
Do you see the question, or shall I read it?
Did you consider Judea parallel calculus,
Yes.
since your method is probabilistic, meaning it's interval? So in our paper, we use the kind of potential outcome framework formulation, but I think Judea to calculus is essentially the same thing. It's just a different language to formalize the causal assumptions, but in the sense of kind of the like statistical inference or machine learning that we do with the data once we have assumptions, they're kind of all the same. So I mean, in our case, we say potential outcomes. In the language of do calculus, we would say the do operator. So in our case, we would be like, oh, how can we learn this treatment effect, which is the expectation of the outcome when we intervene on treatment, but also condition on the covariates, minus the same expectation when we intervene on treatment and set it to control. So About the sensitivities in can you
Maybe,
develop?
yeah, excuse me, Valentin.
Or did I
maybe
answer it?
I'll read the question because
Okay.
the people who will watch afterwards will not understand what
Oh
the
yeah,
question
sorry.
is. So about the sensitivity, since this is based on Gaussian noise, can you develop more on the complexity and tractability of the solution? Is it discrete integration? That's
a good question. It's a very good question. I'm not like super aware about the practical solutions, so we definitely have a theory of how to get the differentially private meta learners. I think this the way Mareza implemented the, for example, this Gaussian noise perturbation for the output is like you have to sort of find the supremum over this joint space of treatment outcomes and covariates, and that thing maybe was not super stable. Yeah, so the actual practical application, like we are still not there. However, I think for the second case, it was fairly easier to implement. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Valentin, again for joining our workshop. Thank you. It was a great pleasure to have you here.
Totally.
And yes, thank you. And I have great pleasure of introducing our last speaker for today. It's Denis Herasimuk, who is currently a PhD student at the New York University and is under the supervision of Professor Julia Stojanovic, who is actually behind the very, very successful program of RAY for Ukraine, of which Tatiana will probably tell you more after this talk. But my pleasure is special because Denis Herasimuk graduated from our university, Ukrainian Catholic University, 3 years ago already. And I remember him, my student, who was always asked questions. So today I'll ask you more questions as well. So Denis this research of Denis is deeply rooted in responsible AI and trustworthy machine learning, with a special focus on responsible model selection. So today, Denis will present his talk, which is quite long, but smarter together, safer apart, achieving privacy and robustness in personalized machine learning. Denis, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Rostislav, for the kind introduction. So I'm happy to answer all your questions. So yeah, and today I want to present one of my papers, which I've done being a student at Imperial College London. And yeah, it's about achieving privacy and robustness in personalized machine learning. So let me start with the motivation. The first motivation here is that privacy matters. Modern software products should come with privacy guarantees, and we see a lot of examples of it. For example, in 2024, Apple announced their Apple Intelligence built on private cloud compute for end-to-end on-device and verifiable cloud privacy. And we also see a lot of other examples, for example, Brave, which is a privacy-focused web browser, or Gemma, which is Google's open weight model family, or one of the most recent trends, it's OpenClaw, which is privacy-preserving AI agent. And another motivation that personalization has become the new default. Companies want richer personal context, for example, to power agentic memory and adaptive assistance. And for that, they need to get data from clients to train their models. But this training on clients' data exposes models to adversaries, so robustness cannot be an afterthought. Also, we get a fundamental trade-off in this space that more personalization demands more shared personal data. Thus, in this work, we set the following research question. So how to build a personalized model per client under privacy and robustness guarantees, deployable on resource-constrained devices. So let me define our problem statement. So in our problem, we consider M clients, each with local data from a personal distribution. So our goal here is to train personalized parameters that minimizes local expected loss of each client. So basically, we don't try to train one consensus model that satisfy all clients. We try to train M models, basically one model per client. And we have two constraints, one differential privacy constraint. I am thankful to the previous speaker for defining it. And another constraint, it's robustness against up to 30% of malicious clients. And in terms of setting, we use fully peer-to-peer setting here. This means that we have no central server, and we need to use only IoT-grade compute for this training. Thus, it defines the following four key technical challenges. The first one is that it's that effective personalization should be done without a central server. This means that this clustering which we use should be done without central server, and we need to come up with such pseudocode for that. Another challenge is that we should preserve data privacy. And previous studies showed that if we add differential privacy noise to model gradients, it degrades accuracy, but it does degrade accuracy even more severely in peer-to-peer than in centralized federated learning. So we should overcome it. The third challenge is that we have resource constraints. From practical side, this means that our training procedure should converge in a few rounds with minimal compute and communication overhead. And the last challenge is that we should be robust to different data and model poisoning attacks. So let me define our solution. So we propose P4. It's a training procedure for such type of threading. And basically it consists from two phases. So phase 1 is group formation and phase 2 is co-training. So in phase 1, our goal is to privately group clients with similar data distributions without a central server. So why grouping matters for personalization? And the reason is that if we randomly cluster our clients, at the end we can get models that perform even worse than we just simply train models on local data of these clients. And the reason is that local distribution of clients can be very different, so it's very non-IAD data. And we should come up with some proxy to group these clients. And in our case, you use L1 normal distance between local model weights. How it works? Basically, before grouping, each client uses the same model architecture and does one global iteration and training on local data. After that, it adds gradient clipping and differential privacy noise. And after that, we get these models with differential privacy noise. And after that, we measure L1 norm distance between their model weights and construct the defined number of groups. And since we use differential privacy, we show in our paper that it satisfies differential privacy guarantees. And we also came up with a lightweight protocol how to group these clients based on these similarities, but you can look at it more in the paper, just how we group them in the defined set of groups. So phase 2 is basically co-training. So it's how we train our models inside each group. One important note here is that for each client, we have two models, one proxy model and another local model. And why we need two models? Proxy model is basically that model which we train with differential privacy noise and gradient clipping. And basically we use this model to share our gradients with other clients. After that, these gradients are aggregated and models can continue their training using this model. Another model is clean model. Basically, it never leaves the device, and the main goal of this model is to capture personalization. So we don't add any differential privacy noise. It basically just trains on local data. And once again, here we use differential privacy, thus such training and model weight sharing satisfies privacy constraint. And we also use knowledge distillation between these two models in each client. So basically, the goal of this knowledge distillation is that local model can also get some extra knowledge from other clients. since it only trains on local data, it should use some way to extract extra knowledge from other clients. For example, if local data doesn't have enough samples for specific classes, this knowledge distillation from aggregated proxy model can help us to get this knowledge and make the model more performant. And the last note is that we also have group aggregator for each group, and it's just one of the clients and that aggregates these models. And we rotate this role over this group, and we do this rotation just to balance overhead. And we also have several layers of defense against different poison attacks, and all of them use our advantages of previous two phases. So the first layer of defense is simple anomaly detection. Basically, if malicious client sends some random weights for aggregation, we're able to detect it with 3 sigma rule on L2 distance between local model weights. And this approach worked quite well for different model poison attacks. Another layer of defense is mcrew. It's existing robust aggregation, and we found that it works quite well with our threading, and it basically selects the M updates whose neighbors agree most and discards outliers before averaging. And the last layer of defense is client self-defense. Basically, we don't add anything here. We get it from our local proxy separation. Basically, we show that this KL knowledge distillation also can help with client self-defense. For example, when proxy model is poisoned, our local model is always clean. And this means that this knowledge distillation between local to proxy can also help proxy model to become more clean. Previous two layers also leverages advantages of our phase one, basically clustering, because in our clustering, we assume that local distribution of clients is similar. And in such a way, we are able to more easier identify outliers. And in terms of experiments, we done one experiment with privacy utility amplification. So basically here we have a set of baselines comparing with our P4 algorithm. We use several data sets from image classification and different types of models and different non-IID settings, how we split this data to be different on each client. And all models use, all settings, all baselines use the same differential privacy noise. And in the setting, we show that our method is able to achieve better accuracy than any other method under differential privacy constraints. And another experiment is where we show that our method is able to tolerate data poisoning attack and 3 model poisoning attacks. Basically, here we show that under 30% of malicious clients, our method is able to tolerate less than 10% of successful attack rate for all these different data sets and all these attacks. And from resource constraint perspective, we show that if you deploy our algorithm on Raspberry Pi, we get the following metrics for runtime, memory, power, and bandwidth, and all of them satisfy as a constraint for IoT-grade compute. And actually, that's all. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dennis, very much. Are there any questions? Yes, there is one. I'll read it aloud. So, Dennis, this question from Munir about the anomaly detection layer. Do you consider the anomaly versus novelty trade-off, since new drifts may uncover new insights about user localized model, making learning or unlearning methods?
Yeah, it's more about drift. So basically, in our case, I believe we don't have any drift in this case. But this drift, I believe, if it appears when before client grouping, so basically those drifted models will be set to another group. This means that this drift should not impact our existing groups. For example, even we will have some new clients that appear in the system, they have completely different data distribution. So algorithm just puts them in a different group, and it can be even just one client in one group if we don't see any other similar groups for this new data drift. And in such way, this drift will not impact our existing groups. So it's even just simple grouping will help here. But in terms of anomaly detection, here we assume that, for example, if attacker, firstly, before grouping, it provides normal gradients, and after that we just group them, and after that during this co-training phase, we get this malicious model poisoning attack. So anomaly detection helps us now to filter out this malicious gradients.
Okay, thank you. And I promised a question from myself. So as far as I understand, on this first phase, when you perform grouping, you probably treat all features equally, but what if some of them are not important at all? Then it creates too many groups, which is probably not desired. Or maybe you can use more sophisticated metrics, which also considered a correlation between different features, so not just Euclidean distance, but something which inherits, so say, is trained on the distribution itself.
More improved features. Okay, yeah. So what I can say here is that we don't basically use features for this clustering. We use model weights. We don't, so we don't share data for clustering. So our clustering also satisfies privacy constraints. So basically, we have our data. We train our models on local data, add differential privacy noise, and then add gradient clipping, and after that use L1 distance between those model weights. And we show that in paper that just this one global iteration of training local data and this one L1 norm between local model weights can correlate with personal distribution of each client. In terms of more improved features, actually we does use them. I just didn't want to explain it in many slides. So basically, instead of raw data, each client uses some transformed features, which is called wavelet features, that captures different edges and textures of images, for example. And these features actually help us to reduce the size of our model, which we use on clients, because we also wanted to satisfy some IoT grade compute. And the second advantage is that using these features, we will need less number of epochs for training, and it gives us advantage for differential privacy, that we will use less epochs, and each epoch has its differential privacy cost. Therefore, we will need to add less noise. So basically, these extra features we use more for improvement of differential privacy training, not clustering, I would say. Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you, Denis, very much for a very nice presentation. I don't see any other questions, so thank you, Denis, and all the speakers of today's workshop. Thank you very much. You made it a great event. And with that, I pass the word to Tatiana and to Joseph for concluding words.
Yeah. Start, Tatiana.
Yeah, I can start. So I want to thank too, like as Rostislav, to all our speakers today for their insightful talks, and to all our participants for their really great questions. This workshop reminded us of the importance of safe and secure AI, not only from technical challenge, but also as a question of trust, responsibility, and societal impact. From Ukrainian perspective, it's really important because Ukraine rebuilds and transforms its institutions now, and we need to engage with AI not only as users, but especially as researchers and partners shaping these technologies in a really responsible and safe way. It was already mentioned, but at the Ukrainian Catholic University, we are beginning to address these questions through the newly established Center for Data AI and Society. And we see it's exactly as a hub coordinating and inspiring this like interdisciplinary research and in this direction, and also like as a part of the communication with society and the whole world. So if you're looking for a partnership, please let me know. And the last thanks to our co-organizer from ELLIS units in Prague and Alicante, especially to Nuria and Joseph for all your dedication in creation this workshop. I guess it was really great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nuria, would you also like to say a few words at the end?
I just wanted to thank you for including us and for bringing this topic this year for the workshop and for your collaboration with the Human-Centric Machine Learning Research Program in ELLIS, and also, of course, with ELLIS Alicante. So I think it's been a great experience, and hopefully the participants have found these topics, interesting, and potentially new ideas or new collaborations might emerge from the workshop. So thank you to you for choosing this theme this year and inviting us, and of course to all the speakers and participants for joining, for several hours today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nuria. It was a real pleasure. It was fantastic talks from you and all the speakers. And it was great to really do it together with the Human-Centric Machine Learning Program. I think it made a total sense and it was great. I would like to again thank speakers, attendees, and just a final word. We hope to continue this tradition next year as well. We've been already thinking, what could be the topics. One topic which sort of resonates now with us, but also the broader community is AI for science. So I'm just sort of putting it here. We, of course, will discuss more, but, maybe this could be one of the candidates for the next year workshop. So thank you, everyone, again, and hopefully see you next year or even earlier at some physical events. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Rostislav. So I will
Thank
disconnect,
you. Yeah.
and I think it appears on the website. So I think we are all.